Welcome in to Check the Mic. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube. And Sam, it's time for maybe my favorite series of the entire year, the entire calendar year. We get to fix every team in just 5 minutes. It'll only take 5 minutes, I swear.
Easy. Perfect.
For those who are new, we started this a couple years ago. An off-season task. We're going to go team by team, starting today, NFC and AFC East. But we're going to go team by team, go through all the off-season moves from free agency to trades, cuts, to some draft options. We're going to fix every team. In the initial iteration of this, Sam, a couple years ago, we said, yeah, we'll do it in 5 minutes. And we got to the first team, and it took 20. And we were going to do like all 32 teams on the same show. We said, forget it. We'll just do 8 teams today, and we'll split it into 4 shows. So that's where we are. 4 shows, team by team. We'll hit all 32 teams over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. So 5 minutes will most certainly be in quotation marks. They will not be 5 minutes. They will be more likely 3 or 4 times that per team.
It will be, and I think we'll literally aim for 15. We'll try to do 15 minutes per team. Hopefully, 2-hour shows here. We'll see how it goes. So we're fixing every team, and it's kind of weird who we're gonna start with the Eagles in a minute here, but they're the Super Bowl champs. They don't need a ton of fixing, but every team has moves to make here, obviously. So we'll go team by team on that. Anything else you want to add at the top before we get going?
No, this will be we'll be doing this for the next couple of weeks. Right, we'll be at the combine next week, so we'll see what kind of content we get out of that. But this will be our show for a little bit.
Yeah. So today and tomorrow we'll fix half the league, and then the other half during combine week next week. We've had some questions about why we're at home, when we're going back to the studio. Just a reminder, we're having a studio built. We're out of PFF studio. So we're going to be working from home for the next couple of weeks here. So maybe weeks and months here, but hopefully right before the draft, we will be in our own studio, and we're excited. We're excited to have the Check the Mic studio being built right now.
Yeah, an official Check the Mic studio then, as opposed to just one that we're squatting in and using outside of ours.
That's right. So it's all in the works. Before we begin, I got to tell you about our friends over at Zbiotics. Let's face it, after a night with drinks, the older people don't always bounce back the next day like they used to. But now we can have a great night and a great next day with Zbiotics pre-alcohol. Zbiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It's invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. So pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. So Sam, bring this along next week for Combine Week, and those early mornings will be a lot easier in Indianapolis. With pre-alcohol, you can stay on track and not let winter travel and celebrations throw you off course. Go to zbiotics.com/check-the-mic to learn more. You get 15% off your first order when you use Check the Mic at checkout. Zbiotics is backed by 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember, head to zbiotics.com/check-the-mic. Use code check-the-mic at checkout for 15% off. All right, man. You ready to go?
Let's go.
Let's try 15 minutes per team. See if we could pull this off. Philadelphia Eagles are up first on our list here. We mentioned this last year. Of course, the Chiefs were the Super Bowl champions, and how do you fix the champs? Well, everybody has. We couldn't fix the champs. Obviously, they didn't win again. They didn't get the repeat. So the Eagles need fixing as well. They have free agents. They have their own cap situation. So that's what we're going to do here. But obviously, Philadelphia, one of the best run organizations in the NFL. They do a great job with managing all of the little edges, Sam, when it comes to the cap, when it comes to stocking up on draft capital, when it comes to how they draft and making sure that they draft high-value positions. It's all good with Howie Roseman in Philadelphia, maybe the best GM in the NFL, but we'll try to solve some of their offseason questions here today.
Yeah, not too many of them, particularly, again, when we think back on the Eagles and what we were talking about them. I mean, everyone going into that Super Bowl the last couple of days was like, this is the most talented team in the NFL as well. And all that youth movement, the defense full of young stars, like there's not much that does need fixing. But there are, I think, a couple of sort of off-season concerns or off-season, things that they need to navigate, hurdles to jump. The first of which for me would be re-signing Zach Bond. obviously a guy that was sort of picked up from a cast-off kind of situational special teams kind of guy and became like an absolute linchpin of that defense as an off-the-ball linebacker. Why it's particularly challenging is because it's kind of an either-or thing. Like he either walks or he gets a long-term extension at big money because he's an off-the-ball linebacker. And the way the franchise tag designation works is, for some reason, the NFL is still shoehorning edge rushers, outside linebackers, into the linebacker designation. So the franchise tag price for a genuine off-the-ball linebacker is way higher than it should be, right? And way higher than a team wants to pay to keep a guy like that around. So, I mean, they could use it on Zach Bond, but it feels like because of that kind of disparity between what the franchise tag should be if you were just looking at off the ball linebackers and what it actually is, because it falls in a bunch of edge rushers, means you're either re-signing Zach Bond to a long-term deal or you're not keeping him around.
I saw the feedback on my microphone. I think I'm back now to my regular mic. I know I had the wrong one set up now. So appreciate the feedback in the chat for that. I mean, if you have Zach Bond, I think I would lock him up here because of the fit with Vic Fangio, and Nakobe Dean is injured. He's heading into the last year of his rookie contract next year. I don't think you want to be in this place where you have to essentially have two new linebackers a year from now. I like the idea of locking Bond up coming off that all-pro year where he was so good in this Vic Fangio system. And we saw, I mean, it all fits together, right? The pass rush, the outside corners, but the underneath coverage defenders in Fangio's system are so important. And the fact that Bond had this breakout season for Philadelphia in this system, I say keep him there, man. And I think that would be huge for the Eagles.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to walk away from an all-pro caliber linebacker if you can make it happen. So obviously it's tricky trying to nail down exactly what his value is, because it's one season that came from nowhere as opposed to, several seasons worth of consistent high-end play like a guy like Fred Warner. But ultimately, like when the choices are keep this guy around for a big money contract that may be a little bit risky relative to some other contracts like that, or let him walk completely and lose an all-pro linchpin from the middle of that defense. When you do have a Nakobe Dean injured, the next man up would be a Jeremiah Trotter type, a rookie that didn't really play that much. I mean, it would be extremely risky, sort of deliberately weakening that part of your defense just for the sake of saving some money.
The other big question mark, I think, it's the other holes to fill essentially for Philadelphia. Right guard Mekhi Becton's going to be a free agent. Every other projected starter is coming back for the Eagles, and then defensively, on the defensive line, Milton Williams and Josh Sweat, probably two of the highly coveted free agents. Obviously, the big story coming out of the Super Bowl was Philly's, not only their pass rush, but their depth. It's always the story in Philadelphia, the depth up front. So let's start with the defensive line. Milton Williams has become coveted because the interior pass rushers around the league, there's not a ton of them, and he is outstanding getting after the quarterback, continues to get better, came into the league as a hybrid player, but really does some damage on the interior. And then Josh Sweat, he's continued to develop, of course, had the big Super Bowl. So I don't know if the Eagles can bring one or both of those guys back. I think they're going to make a ton of money in free agency. So I think we're back to the Eagles going back to the draft deep defensive line class. I could see them drafting defensive linemen maybe with their first two picks to replace those guys.
Yeah, and Bond's deal is going to be involved in that as well. Like effectively, you've got three reasonably high-priced players hitting free agency at the same time. They've got some space, like they got $24 million worth of cap space, but they're not swimming in cap space. Like they don't have the kind of firepower to just say, let's bring them all back, probably. So you're almost certainly looking at that group and prioritizing, an order of which ones we would want to keep. And if we can make that happen, if we can't, we go down to the next guy. I would imagine priority one of those three would be Zach Bond, keep the off the ball linebacker in place. He was the all pro. Priority two, I would imagine, would be Josh Sweat on the edge. In part because, look, Jalen Carter is the most dominant player on that defensive line. He's the primary source of interior pass rush, and I think he's a big part of Milton Williams developing and improving and having the kind of season that he had, you would theoretically project that to the next guy, right? Whoever is going to come in and take the Milton Williams snaps, you would also bank on that guy having a favorable situation because of what Jalen Carter does. And then Milton Williams will be the third guy. Like if you can't bring either of the other two back, oh, look, we've got some extra cash. Let's try and keep Milton in the building.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, Milton Williams and Osa Odigizua, not necessarily household names, I don't think, to a ton of fans. Maybe some hardcore fans, certainly Eagles and Cowboys fans.
Right.
Those guys could break the bank, with the cap going up and scarcity as far as interior pass rush goes. I think they're going to make a ton of money and probably price themselves out of at least, Philly with some of the other options that they have. If they go the draft route, and again, I think it's going to line up for them picking at 32. Guys like Nick Scourton from Texas A&M, kind of coming off of a subpar year relative to expectations, but he can get after the quarterback. I love BC's Donovan Izaraku, who had a great year last year. I think he could rush the passer and play the run pretty well. I could see them, again, going either edge or interior defensive line as it comes up. The other move, man, and my Morgan Moses jokes will be coming up soon. I won't be giving Morgan Moses to the Eagles here. But DeMarcus Lawrence might be one of my favorite buy low candidates around the NFL. Like, wouldn't this be a classic Eagles move? He's coming off of injury, uber productive player. He's in the division, right? We love the Eagles storyline of killing our in division rivals here. DeMarcus Lawrence as a free agent for the Cowboys as a potential buy low option as they're replenishing the D line. I could absolutely see Howie doing something like that.
Yeah, well, critically, uber productive in the ways that aren't measured by sacks. Like he's the guy that's been underrated or sort of knocked for years because he doesn't get the sack numbers. But in every other capacity, his performance is really good, particularly against the run. He's one of the most dominant run defending edge rushers in the NFL. But yeah, he's a fascinating guy where, I mean, number one, he does look like he's on the wane. So it's like the decline of his career, the twilight of his career. But number two, like if you don't need the sack total, I mean, they would theoretically be moving from one guy who's always been productive but never gotten sacks in Brandon Graham to another guy that's been productive and doesn't get the sacks in DeMarcus Lawrence. Like, Brandon Graham had one double-digit sack season in his career, something crazy like that, but was always one of the most consistent, like, pressure-generating edge rushers in football. Lawrence might not be quite the same player, but it's similar idea that you're taking a guy whose impact cannot be measured accurately by just a sack total.
The other position I mentioned, right guard, Mekhi Becton, they took a 1-year flyer on him. He became a nice, good cogent starter for them for the Super Bowl run. And so replacing him, I could see them doing something similar, right? You just go to that second wave of free agency. The Eagles, the last few years, they've kept most of that offensive line intact, right? And it's always like one moving part or two moving parts. So they've done a nice job of that. One more year of one moving part. Yes, they always probably have to think about Lane Johnson's eventual replacement, maybe draft a future tackle or developmental tackle as they've done through the years. But either second wave of free agency, I think, to replace Becton. Maybe they try to bring him back, but I think he's going to maybe make some money out there. The other options late first round too. Tyler Booker from Alabama. Again, probably the consensus top guard in the draft. I don't know if sometimes that goes 15, sometimes that goes in the 20s or lands in the late first. Donovan Jackson also from Ohio State, kicked out to left tackle on their playoff run. Both of those guys potentially available. Either way, I think the Eagles O-line, D-line, after 2 years, after last year drafting two corners with their first two picks, I think they're going back to the trenches with their early draft picks this year.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Definitely, it would be a potential spot for that late first rounder as well. I agree. And then the last thing the last sort of question mark over the Eagles is offense coordinator Kellen Moore, now the head coach of the New Orleans Saints. So they just have to make sure that they don't let that, create the kind of problem that it created a couple of years ago when they lost both coordinators in the same offseason. They got to make sure that they have some kind of continuity going there at offensive coordinator. The move that I saw Jeremy Fowler, I think, reporting was most likely is that Kevin Patullo is going to take that job, or it's his job to lose. He was their pass game coordinator, and he's worn a bunch of different hats within that organization. That would make a ton of sense as a continuity hire, a guy promoted from within, a guy they seem to have faith in and has been a guy under Nick Sirianni, under Kellen Moore as well, that would make a ton of sense to me.
Yeah, and it's one of those that is tough to comment on. Right, we don't have a ton of data or history to say this is good, bad, or indifferent. But to describe what I would say the Kellen Moore experience, as we talked about when he signed with the Saints, there's no distinct characteristic I think about Kellen Moore other than adjusting to his personnel. He did a great job of adjusting to the Eagles personnel, right, with Saquon Barkley, with those pass catchers on the outside. It is a great situation to take over as a play caller. But it's not a slam dunk, right? We're 1 year removed from the Eagles. When we're saying Brian Johnson was calling plays, right? He was replacing Shane Steichen from the year before during the 2023 season, and they hit an absolute wall, right? They weren't handling blitz pickups. It wasn't a well-constructed offense in 2023. So it doesn't mean it's completely smooth sailing, but perhaps the continuity of Patriots, following Kellen Moore will help. But it's at least a loss, right, with Kellen Moore, and that's what happens when you win. You lose some coaches, and you have to try to continue to improve or maintain that current level.
Yep.
All right, man. Did we fix the Eagles? We get to the end of it. It's like, hey, we gave you a bunch of options. We give you some options, give you a little bit of a blueprint for what the offseason might look like. Anything else on the Eagles this offseason? Are they going to repeat?
Much it. I mean, this is theoretically going to be the easiest team we have to deal with, right? They're the Super Bowl champions, and they were a Super Bowl team running in, like not one that went all in to do this. They were a team that was sort of well constructed, is built on a foundation of youth. So, the biggest issues are, we talked about it, right? They've got 4 players that are hitting free agency that they would like to, in an ideal world, bring back. They're probably not going to be able to bring back all 4. If they can bring back a couple of them, maybe even just one of them, then you've got, say, 3 holes to fill between the draft and free agency, and then that offensive coordinator issue.
The only other question that came up in the chat was about all the void years, all the money that they've pushed forward. I'll just say the Eagles, it's not just Howie. It's a great team. They do a great job managing all that stuff. I don't think it's going to be a Saints issue where the credit card comes due. I think they've got this well in hand, and how to manipulate their contracts and their cap to always make sure that they're flexible, but also, maintaining a really strong roster and not losing a whole lot. So I think they're in good shape going forward. Good?
Yep.
Fixed. The Super Bowl champions are fixed. Let's go to the Washington Commanders. This one's a little different, man. We're gonna fix the Commanders in just 5 minutes, 5 to 15 minutes. Washington, they were a Final Four team, right? And when you're putting your notes together, it's like, well, they could use a little of this, a little of that. We need a wide receiver too. O-line definitely needs some improvements. But overall, an outstanding year 1 for Adam Peters as general manager. Again, they made it to the NFC Championship. They exceeded all expectations. And last year, when they built their team, remember, you came into the season saying, hey, if everything works out, if it all comes together, the Commanders could be sneaky good. Well, the most important thing came together, which was Jaden Daniels looked like a superstar, future MVP candidate. He looked special. And then all those little, hey, we're going to bring in a Frankie Louvu and a Bobby Wagner and these one-off moves, these Tyler Zbiotics moves that I think are, they stack up in free agency. That's what we're going to see in a couple weeks here. Some stacking up some of those second and third tier type of moves. They pay dividends sometimes, and that's, I think, what happened for Washington this past year.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you make that volume of moves, it just makes it very difficult to pin down what a team is going to be. They could all be upgrades, in which case you've taken a massive leap forward and you're going to be way better than people expected you to be. Or, they could all bust, and then you got worse. If anything, you're terrible. Or more likely, it's going to be somewhere in the middle, and you end up somewhere in the middle. But Washington, like the overwhelming majority of those moves worked out, or more importantly, as you said, the biggest ones, like the biggest ticket items, worked out. And in particular, Jaden Daniels was an absolute slam dunk. I mean, arguably the greatest quarterback rookie season that we've ever seen. And that's the kind of thing that will propel you into the playoffs, and then even deeper into the playoffs when he's playing at that kind of level. But to me, so this happens every now and again. We saw it with Justin Herbert and the Chargers. What Jaden Daniels was able to do behind an offensive line that never looked particularly good on paper and was a real weakness going into the season on paper was incredibly impressive. I think a key thing to do, though, is to not let that fool you into thinking, well, we don't need to worry about the offensive line then. Jaden Daniels can work with this kind of group. we're good. To me, the biggest weakness on paper of this roster is still that offensive line. And now that you know Jaden Daniels is really good, the biggest thing I would want to do this offseason is, well, now let's really help him out and make sure that we don't stress that. We don't, put him under a ton of pressure, figuratively and literally, and let's try and really build up that group in front of him.
Yeah, and so it's an interesting spot because technically all the starters are coming back next year, but one of the starters, Brandon Coleman, third-round rookie, I think he had his struggles. And what happens a lot of times with tackles is they have their struggles in bigger games or against, better pass rushes. And I think that's what kind of happened with Coleman. He might actually be better fit to play guard. Andrew Wiley, probably on the lower end of starting right tackles. He's been serviceable through the years, but I think they could use an upgrade at either position. The interiors, not bad. Tyler Zbiotics, again, came over from Dallas. I thought that was a really shrewd signing. Those are the types of signings I think that are the way to build the offensive line, like $10 million a year for Zbiotics, right? Maybe bring in a James Daniels in free agency, those types of players. He's coming off an injury, but bring in a Morgan Moses at right tackle. Now that's a 1 year. It's a 1 year stopgap. This isn't perfect Morgan Moses territory. He's coming up later, but yeah, I think going back to the draft as well would be a smart move, and getting younger and continuing to build depth on that O-line for Jaden Daniels.
I mean, look, Sam Cosmi is a great offensive lineman, their right guard. Like, he's obviously their best offensive lineman. I think they could upgrade the other 4 positions, like, without too much of a problem. I know they just brought in Tyler Zbiotics and they gave him decent money, but my point is the standard that they are at with the other 4 positions on that offensive line wouldn't be that difficult to upgrade any of the 4. So in particular, I think tackles are the 2 biggest weaknesses, but you're looking at that group and you're like, Cosmi is set, right? For the next 5 years, you would expect Cosmi to be their starting right guard. Any of the other 4 could be a different name in the next 5 years, at which point you need to be looking at free agency and the draft. Like, you need to be hammering that in both. Even though they're under contract, it doesn't mean we stop looking for upgrades.
The chat's asking about Ronnie Stanley. I mean, he's the top tackle free agent. It's pretty much him and Cam Robinson as far as, I think Stanley's in a better spot, also not coming off of the big injury that, Cam didn't get hurt. I'm confusing him with Darrisaw down the stretch there. But the 2 tackles, Ronnie Stanley's definitely the best. I mean, every tackle needy team is like having that Ronnie Stanley discussion. Do we give him the big deal? And he's been kind of in and out of the lineup over the last couple of years. I would be fine with that. Either way, they have $80 million worth of cap space. They are one of these teams that they're blessed with the Jaden Daniels contract for the next couple of years. They can do some overspending. I think they're one of the teams probably that's in the Myles Garrett trade market. And so when we're looking at a team who was in the Final Four, they were supposed to be rebuilding this year, right, Sam? So there are offensive line questions. I think there's defensive line depth questions. There's questions in the secondary, especially cornerback 2. And then there's wide receiver 2, opposite Terry McLaurin. We got some good play from De'Ami Brown down the stretch, but they don't have a ton of players under contract at receiver. So like all of those things need to be ticked off, but they have the cap space to be able to make some power moves. And I think one of those is they're one of the few teams that I think could stomach a Myles Garrett draft pick trade plus the actual contract.
Okay. I'm here for that. I think you're right though, that they're one of those interesting teams where they have a ton of cap space in this year where free agency is generally absent those monster names, those big ticket items. The Stanley thing is interesting because at his best, Ronnie Stanley has been arguably the best pass blocking left tackle in the game, at this point, right? Since the retirement of guys like Joe Thomas, Stanley took over and looked like he was going to be the standard as a pass blocker at left tackle. And then he had that really bad injury that basically cost him 2 straight years. And when he came back, he's been good, but he hasn't been the level he was before that injury. So I think there's a lot, not only are teams having that discussion about, bringing in Ronnie Stanley, but I think they're also asking themselves, what is he now, right? Is he the guy that we saw last year, or can he get back to being the guy before the injuries? Like, have we seen a permanent reduction in the level that Ronnie Stanley can play at? Or are we simply witnessing like this long drawn out return to full health Like if you knew you could get the kind of all pro caliber pass blocker Ronnie Stanley back, then I think it's absolutely that would be a position that I would go after if I'm Washington. Let's try and get a left tackle that will be not just serviceable, but like legit to pair with Jaden Daniels. And, there's one slight caveat to the Ronnie Stanley elite pass blocking stuff. There was always that question of, well, how much does Lamar Jackson impact that, right? Having a quarterback that you have to think about where he's going to be when you're rushing the quarterback. You can't just pin your ears back, tear around the edge and hope he's going to be there, because he won't be. So you actually have to change the way you rush the passer a little bit. Jaden Daniels is already in that same bracket, right? You can't just rush Jaden Daniels with reckless abandon. You need to think about what you're doing, because otherwise he's going to scramble and he's gone. So if you were like, well, Stanley's not quite as good as those numbers would suggest because of the quarterback, well, the quarterback would be similar in Washington in terms of also, applying that kind of boost to a pass blocker. So you would be getting the same level in those terms, because you're that variable should still be the same.
It's a great point, Sam, and it's probably one of the reasons. Remember last year, Baltimore went into the year, we were like, what are they doing on the offensive line, right? We don't know who's playing right guard. We don't know what they're going to do at right tackle. And they just went into the draft and they took Roger Rosengard in the second round, and he eventually became the starting right tackle. They opted into some question marks on the offensive line, I think in part because Lamar Jackson factor, right? And I think Washington has that type of force multiplier in Jaden Daniels, where you could probably do with a lesser offensive line from a pass blocking standpoint, because you have to worry about him scrambling, and from a run blocking standpoint, because he's going to be that, extra man. He's going to avoid a defender. But to your initial point on this whole thing, you have to tread lightly with that, right? That's how Seattle handled Russell Wilson for a while. They said, look, Russ is going to run around and make plays. We can deal with a lesser offensive line through the years. Even though they invested, they just didn't, hit on a bunch of players. They did feel like they didn't have to, overpay a ton for offensive line. So it's an interesting dynamic where that might be your schematic advantage. But I love the idea of bringing in a Ronnie Stanley, maybe moving Coleman, letting him compete at left guard, makes everything just a little bit better up front, continue to replenish through the draft. And the other thing, my weakness in all of these, Sam, is I tend to ignore injury history, or it's such an unknown. It's still like an unknown. So I'm a, big flashy name guy, and I'm more likely to push aside injury history when it comes to players. But Stanley was healthy last year and made it through the year.
Yeah. It wasn't too long ago where you would be like, ooh, I don't know about bringing in Ronnie Stanley. That injury history is terrifying. Because it was the manner that it happened. It wasn't like anyone can have one bad injury and you're down and you come back. But it was the way he came back, played like a game, and was so clearly not able to go in that game that they basically shut him down for a whole nother year. And you're like, that sounds terrible. Like, that sounds career ending for an offensive lineman. That sounds like the kind of thing that does not easily recover. And yet he did come back and play, a full season and look good doing it. So I'm definitely a lot less concerned about that now than I was at some point. The other name I would bring up for Washington, though, is Alaric Jackson, who, early in his career was like the sort of the way that Jacoby Myers was the poster child for the problems of the New England receiving corps. Like, if he's your number one, this is a terrible group. And then Alaric Jackson was like the poster child for the Rams offensive line has fallen to rack and ruin. Look, their left tackle is Alaric Jackson. But actually, over his career, he's improved and gotten better and was pretty good last year. And, he feels like a really under the radar free agent name, where he's coming to free agency, young, still improving theoretically. And he would be going from one quarterback who, Matthew Stafford he's not giving you that boost, right? No pass rusher is concerned about where Matthew Stafford's going to be when they're deciding what they're going to do rushing the passer. So he would potentially be getting that Ronnie Stanley boost that we talked about, of all of a sudden his life's made a little bit easier by Jaden Daniels. Like, Alaric Jackson in Washington could actually end up being a really, really nice left tackle.
I like it. That's a good suggestion there. Let's go back to the defensive line here for Washington. Myles Garrett, do you think they're one of the teams that's at least in the mix? I mean, honestly, there's not a ton, I think, that are either feel like they're close, have the money to do it, and based off how I think the Commanders drafted really well last year, and because of that, maybe you can sacrifice a couple picks to make it all happen.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it depends what exactly that trade's going to look like, but sure, I would be perfectly prepared, particularly now that it's a low first round draft pick. I'm all for the idea of flipping my first round draft pick and maybe a couple of other bells and whistles for Miles Garrett. And then if you have to make him the best paid defensive player in the NFL to make that happen, you can absorb that because you have $80 million of cap space. You expect to be good right now. You're not massively concerned about his, drop off decline arc, given that he's now pushing, the upwards of 30. That's when the decline tends to start for pass rushers. Like, you probably don't care about that for the next couple of years when you expect to be at your best with this young quarterback. So, yeah, I mean, Washington, I think, make the most sense of a team to be calling Cleveland and trying to make something happen.
Whether or not they go with Garrett, they're picking 29th, back end of the first round, and then 61st in the second round. So back end of the second, obviously. They're another team that if they doubled up on the defensive line, I wouldn't hate it, right? So this scenario, let's start. Like, I want to talk D line, but at cornerback, Mike Sanders still did a great job filling in as kind of CB2 on the other side of Marshawn Lattimore. I would rather see Sanders still play in the slot. That's where he played at Michigan. I mean, he reminded me of Mike Hilton coming out. I think everybody had that type, not that comp, but that type of dude. Mike Sanders still is the type of nickel, energy guy on the defensive side of the ball. I think he could do that. I would love to see him play nickel. And so cornerback 2 is this, bring in a Travarius Ward, one of the top options, a DJ Reed, Carlton Davis, maybe. I think all of those guys opposite Lattimore. Are you a little fragile with some older corners with Lattimore and whoever you bring in? Maybe. I would love to see them solve that, though, in free agency and then get into the draft and maybe go double up on the defensive line late first and late second. Because, again, I think there's a deep enough draft, enough options there that they could really do some damage on the D-line in this draft.
Yeah, and I've even seen Lattimore talked about as a cut candidate as well. So, like, you might have an entire cornerback room essentially to replace or to build in this offseason. So, sure, Sanders still is really good. He can play outside if you need him to, but I think in an ideal world, they want 2 high caliber starting corners that they trust, and they can put Sanders still back in the slot. One of those might be Marshawn Lattimore. They brought him over. He was injured a lot. He's been injured a lot. When he's been back, he hasn't looked anything like the player that he was early in his career, but who knows how much of that is the injuries at this point. Either way, he's a pretty significant unknown quantity at this point. You've got guys like Benjamin St-Juste who just isn't at that high enough level. So, they could easily bring in 2 guys that they expect to start, right? And, there's a few of those available in free agency. A guy like DJ Reed from New York, from the Jets, would be a fascinating addition. I mean, he was quietly a really, really good player for them. All the attention went to Sauce Gardner on the other side, but DJ Reed was fantastic for the Jets as well. He would be a guy that you would really bank on just immediately coming in, solidifying one spot, and then reducing the number of concerns down to 1.
Let's sign Reed in free agency. Let's do that for Washington.
Solid.
And then in the draft, I keep talking about the D-line, but here's the other scenario. Some of the top corners, Benjamin Morris, Siobhan Revell, both of those guys injured during the season. Will Johnson, of course, injured during the season as well. But I think Morrison and Revell in particular could be there late in the first round. Another one of those buy low. I think they're top 15 caliber players in this draft. And if the injuries have them dropping, love that type of pick for Washington in the late first as well. Maybe getting a top 15 player a little bit later in that later draft spot. I think those could be outstanding fits at corner. And then there's wide receiver 2. Again, for a team that finished in the Final Four, it does feel like there's a lot more to fix or to make sure is in good standing heading into next year. Any thoughts on what they do there opposite Terry McLaurin?
I mean, it's obviously an area they could stand to strengthen. I don't feel like it's as big a need as I would imagine wide receiver 2 is going to be most people's, top or second need for Washington this offseason. I don't think it's that big a deal. If you can find an upgrade, absolutely. But like the combination that they've had there has been perfectly serviceable. McLaurin and Daniels are like the important variables there. Yes, you absolutely want additional weapons, and the more you get, the better the offense is. But like I feel like you have bigger weaknesses to worry about than wide receiver 2 on this roster. absolutely draft somebody, grab a guy in the mid rounds, look to that sort of not second wave, but like look to the second tier of free agents. Like there will be serviceable players that can come in and be useful. Like we mentioned Greg Dortch, right? Greg Dortch, not necessarily a wide receiver too, but a really useful slot option for the Cardinals. A very good player that can absolutely improve a receiving core in the whole. If you end up with Terry McLaurin, Greg Dortch, you draft somebody, like you're building a wide receiver core that's going to be perfectly serviceable.
The chat's suggesting maybe cut candidate Christian Kirk from the Jags, reunited with Cliff Kingsbury. And then I wanted to bring up Cooper Kupp. There's a couple landing spots that I think a Cooper Kupp fit would make sense. I do think this is one of them. I'll talk about New England later. I think there's a great fit there, but I like pairing Kupp with these rookie quarterbacks as a good route runner who's going to be, I think, still able to get open and do some damage against zone, against man when needed. Again, injury aside, how much does he have left? I think Kupp might be a good option. It sounds like you wouldn't lean that way, though. Maybe address some of these other options: D-line, corner, offensive line. And when you stack those up, it does push wide receiver 2 down just a little bit. I agree with you there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying you're not going to bring in a Cooper Kupp, particularly if he ends up being a cut option, as opposed to just a trade option. But like, this is part of why having $80 million cap space is a useful thing. It means you can be opportunistic, right? You can prioritize whatever. But if a guy like Cooper Kupp suddenly becomes available, or it becomes a deal that you're willing to do from a trade collateral standpoint, like you have the cash to absorb that easily as well. So yeah, to me, wide receiver 2 is a lower priority than it is for other people. I would definitely prioritize, offensive line, secondary. Let's rebuild that defense. But I'm not saying like don't do anything at wide receiver 2 if something emerges that you think makes a ton of sense. I just think that's an easier fix than like we got to go, prioritize a really high quality, high price wide receiver 2.
We've given some options to Washington. Have we fixed the Washington Commanders? DJ Reed, drafted in the trenches and drafting corners. We're drafting all the good players. Commanders fixed. It's time to fix the Dallas Cowboys, Sam. Ooh. Cowboys are up next. Last year, it felt simple, right? It was like just play better in the playoffs. I mean, not simple, but how do you fix that, right? The Cowboys were coming off of great years where it's like, hey, you're making a lot of the right moves, but going into the, just add some free agent pieces this offseason, supplement this nice nucleus of a roster that you've built. Dallas did none of the above, and things got worse. And now it does feel like they've got more issues to resolve here, right? We talked about DeMarcus Lawrence being a free agent. The offensive line is probably in the worst shape that it's been in a decade, right? I mean, Dallas was annually one of the best offensive lines, and now you're talking about Zach Martin getting older, talking about free agency, both tackle spots regressing last season. So Dallas needs to improve both trenches. The wide receiver core was one of the deepest in the NFL a couple of years ago. Now it's CeeDee Lamb and friends. So I think there's a lot to do in Dallas beyond just play better in January.
Yeah, this happens in soccer sometimes where like if a team doesn't bring in a bunch of signings in the offseason, it feels like they went backwards, even though, the team is basically the same because you lose ground versus everybody else. Dallas feels like the NFL version of that, where obviously you had the farce of Jerry Jones saying all in and then basically doing nothing, like sitting on his hands the whole offseason. But it kind of shows how quickly it can all fall apart if you don't do anything in the offseason. Like if you do not make significant moves, your roster can just erode and fall apart really quickly. And that feels like what's happened to Dallas. Like star players got hurt or played badly. And now you have a ton of holes open up on this roster. So like the power of future proofing and bringing in players, not just for this year, but for the next year is real. And if all you do in an offseason is sign a couple of like 1 year stopgaps, all you did is like increase the weight of next year's losses when you get around to that time.
So here we are. Where do we start with Dallas? Right? I mentioned, let's talk O-line here. Man, I've changed, Sam. I used to start with QBs and pass catchers only.
Ooh, QB is you're stuck.
We know that.
Right? Like,
I used to start with pass catchers. Now look at me starting with the line. Is this the Eagles effect on me? Is this the Eagles affecting everyone here? No, I was already moving this way. They drafted Tyler Guyton in the first round last year. I mentioned that he might be the most important first-round pick because they're expecting this developmental project to step in and play left tackle on a team with Super Bowl aspirations. Well, Guyton had a 49 PFF grade last year, got benched multiple times, but he's still penciled in as the starting left tackle. I mean, you're not stuck with him, but you bought into the developmental aspect of Guyton, so he's there, right? Terrence Steele, he's making over $16 million a year. He's okay at right tackle. Zach Martin, who we mentioned, free agent plus potential retirement. Left guard and center looks pretty good. So either way, I think you need depth. You're not going to replace either of those tackles, but I think you want to have some tackles for the future in case Guyton doesn't figure it out, and give you some flexibility, and you have to get better on the interior.
I mean, I think we're both going to be coming from the same place, which is the thing that you need to address the most is to make sure the situation around Dak Prescott is as good as it can be, right? Like, you've paid Dak this giant sum of money, you've paid CeeDee Lamb this giant sum of money. Now you need to make sure that that isn't just wasted money, because they need to be able to function as a unit, and they haven't been, particularly certainly didn't last year, even before Dak got hurt, and they haven't in the past unless other things around them have been really good. The line, you're right, has kind of fallen apart, but also the receiving core has fallen apart. So now it's CeeDee Lamb, great, but Brandon Cooks is gone. And then you have all the Jalens, right? Jalen Tolbert, Jalen Brooks, like all these guys who are maybe nice 3s, 4s, but I don't think you want them as your number 2. I think they need that's a team, unlike Washington, who I think does need a significant wide receiver too, because I think Dak Prescott in his career has shown himself to be extremely susceptible to changes in his environment, whether it's receiving core or offensive line. And right now, both of them are weaker than they've been in the past.
All right, so you're talking receivers. I want to circle back here though, because Brian Schottenheimer taking over as head coach, and of course it was controversial because no one else interviewed Schottenheimer. New offensive coordinator is Clayton Adams, who just came out this week. He's an O-line guy, right? He's saying the Cowboys want to, quote, create violence in the run game, end quote. And Schottenheimer, remember, like he was calling plays for Seattle when Russ was having those games where he'd throw the ball 22 times and 24 times. I really think Dallas might want to reshape everything up front, run the ball like crazy, and they might go full investment in the run game. Now we're fixing the team here. We're doing our own thing. But I think that really might be what they want this identity to be. Mike McCarthy I'm not saying McCarthy was wrong for this. Pass heavy, game script was generally put the ball in Dak's hands. Dak had his best statistical season in 2023 with McCarthy's play calling. CeeDee Lamb's your best player on offense. You want to get him the ball. But I do wonder how much Dallas is going to go back to this, old school pound the rock, Schottenheimer style ball. And that if that's the strategy, maybe Tyler Guyton isn't safe, right? Maybe they are going to go and try to reshape the entire thing up front and go all in at running back, which opens up the door for an Ashton Jeanty in the first round for the Dallas Cowboys at pick number 12.
Ashton Jeanty is the pick that like everyone wants to make happen in the draft. It's that classic example though of like it's a broken situation. Like I don't want Ashton Jeanty coming in to try and fix the Dallas run game. The run game needs to be fixed before you bring in Ashton Jeanty. If it's fixed, I'm all for bringing in a guy like Jeanty because I think he's amazing, but I don't want to bring him into a line that isn't functioning. So at the very minimum, you would need to like overhaul that group in free agency before you're even vaguely confident that the line is good enough and competent enough that Jeanty can come in and make the kind of difference that he needs to make if you're going to draft him that high in the draft. So where are we fixing this in free agency?
As far as the offensive line goes?
Yeah.
I was thinking Mekhi Becton could be a good fit.
You're just going to bring in 365-pound people?
Yes. I mean, before I was even thinking about, hey, we need to, this is going to be a run-first type of team, and they're going to, create violence and all that stuff. I do think Becton earned himself some money with a solid performance after moving from tackle, right? And with Zach Martin, this is a Zach Martin replacement here. I think Becton could be a good fit there. I'm not suggesting that they draft Jeanty. I'm just saying I think that thought is absolutely going to cross their mind. I think more realistically in the first round, though, with Demarcus Lawrence potentially out here. I would love to bring him back, by the way, on a buy low, second time. All those edge rushers, James Pierce, Michael Williams, Jalen Walker, I think all of those guys should realistically be in play opposite Micah Parsons in the first round. I've pivoted a little bit, but yeah. So I gave Beckett on the O line. Do you have any other options on the because I don't Cooper Beebe was fine at center. Like I don't think they're replacing anyone else really up front unless they decide these guys don't fit the new scheme.
I think Beebe was solid, certainly, especially relative to where he came from. Mid-round draft pick. Obviously, Tyler Smith at left guard is good. Steele, he could be replaced, but the big problem that Dallas has is they don't have the cap space. Like, ironically, having sat in their hands and not done much last year, it's not like they saved a ton of money and they're ready, like they're loaded up to go this year. Like, because of the contracts and the way that they goof around with that, game of chicken when it comes to extending players, like the deals are more punitive than they should be from a team point of view. And they head into free agency. Now they can make some space. But this is not they're not like Washington, right? Who's already sitting there with $80 million worth of war chest ready to deploy. This is a team that's pretty hard up against the cap and can probably only make, one significant signing. And if that's Becton, okay, like Becton theoretically would upgrade that offensive line relative to last year and hopefully going forward. He's still an injury risk, though. Like Becton's, one of his biggest problems was not necessarily the play early in his career at tackle, but like the dude got hurt a lot. And even this year, got hurt at times. I would be definitely twitchy about giving him, high end money and relying on him as one of my starting 5 offensive linemen. They might be desperate enough to make it happen, but I would be scared by that.
Yeah. I mean, look, I don't love a lot of the options that Dallas have. They're $2 million plus over the cap, only 6 draft picks. Missing a 4th rounder in there. So it's not great. I mean, it's not a great overall situation. We haven't talked about defensive tackle and the fact that they had one of the worst run defenses in the NFL, historically bad, really, in the first 8 to 10 weeks of the season. So they have issues up front. It's kind of a multi-year issue. I don't know. This kind of feels like a reset the trenches type of year, though, for Dallas in the draft. The shiny objects at 12, though, whether it is Ashton Genty or say Teteroa McMillan at 12 to be that wide receiver 2 opposite CeeDee Lamb. I think the shiny playmaker types, they're gonna be intriguing. I feel like I would go the other way though and focus on those edge rushers are potentially available there. By the way, Jalen Walker he was wearing number 11, had a big game. I think it was against Texas and or maybe against Kentucky. Micah Parsons was tweeting at him saying, "Hey, that number 11 can play." They could be teammates here in the future. So I don't know, man. I think for Dallas, as much as I love solving the receiving core, and I know the history of Dak when he had Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, and Michael Gallup, like that works, man. I know that works in the NFL to put defenses in a bind. I think they need to reset up front, maybe both sides of the ball this offseason. That needs to be the priority.
I mean, the problem that Dallas has is that first round draft pick's in a great spot, I think, to address any one of 3 or 4 needs. They need like 4 of those, right? If they had picks 12 through 16, I'd love their spot. They would still be doing what they do every year, which is going into the draft, like needing that player to be good, like they did a year ago with Tyler Guyton. But you'd at least be like, yeah, we can get a player that we expect to fill each one of these roles, come in, make an immediate impact. The problem is they're probably going to be in a position where they can do that with one player, and then like the 2nd and 3rd rounders need to hit as well. Like this is a rough spot to be in.
All right, man. Well, what other suggestions do we have here for the Cowboys? I've suggested I think D-line is going to be the play in the first round. Push aside the Genties. They do need to address running back too. Like we can't completely ignore running back, but I think you have to play to the depth of this class and attack running back. They'll be starting caliber running backs, I think, in round 3 and 4, at least serviceable guys, because Rico Dowdle's out as well, and he played well down the stretch. They actually do have to address running back. I would address it later, right? And build in the trenches with those first couple picks. Like I said, for the Eagles and the Commanders.
Yeah. And you'll say for most people, it's just this the philosophy that GM Steve has not been afforded the chance to do with because Jacksonville didn't put you on the short list.
They didn't. they're making their decision this weekend, apparently. And look, maybe they'll surprise everybody and hire me, interview aside, with the no interview, but I doubt it.
No, it seems unlikely. I will say, so I just fired up the Dallas Cowboys on the PFF mock draft simulator just to see what that could look like. And actually, it all came up Dallas. You know, I wasn't loving the situation to begin with, but with my first 3 picks, I was able to get Kenneth Grant at 12. Okay, that might be seen as a bit of a stretch, but that's a dude that fills that interior defensive lineman role.
Cowboys fans are saying another Michigan defensive tackle to solve the run defense. There's going to be a lot of same position, same school scouting going on with Dallas fans when they hear that.
Don't care. And I also think he would pair reasonably well with Mozzie Smith. Like, I think that those two would coexist on the same defensive line. Tyler Booker slid all the way to 44, so you get him in the second round. That feels like a steal. And then round 3, we fit wide receiver 2 with Jalen Royals, my guy from Utah State. So as a first 3 picks, I'm loving that.
So the simulator basically has everybody going around lower than they should. Those 2 guys going around lower than they probably will. And if that's what happens, that is good drafting. That is a good way to do things. Get the guys that fall. That was the Eagles strategy, right? Get Nolan Smith, get Jalen Carter, get those guys that are going lower than they should.
And look, you can say there's no way that ever happens, but we're months out from the draft. Who the hell knows who's going to slide and who's going to... But, like, this is the kind of draft that Dallas actually needs to have in order to repair this roster in one offseason.
Yeah, I wouldn't hate Kenneth Grant there. I think, either way, you're losing Osa Odigizua, potentially losing DeMarcus Lawrence, right? So I think you got to add something on the D-line there. The other name I just wanted to throw out there as far as wide receiver 2 goes, Chris Godwin, I think he's closer to maybe going back to Tampa Bay. They're restructuring his void years so they can negotiate and, try to take care of business there. But I would love a Chris Godwin. He's another one of those buy low, coming off of injury type of candidates that I think would be again, right? I mean, it's like it took him a couple years to get back to full speed after he got injured the first time. So that's a little risky, but as a compliment to CD Lamb, who could still get open, toughness over the middle, would love Godwin if they can get him for the right price for Dak.
That was that was one of the most sort of heartbreaking scenes of the 2024 season was Godwin going down, knowing immediately, like, this is a bad injury again, sitting there on the cart on his way off and saying or mouthing to somebody like, time to go again. Like the dude had just been through these rounds and rounds of like rehab, endless rehab, just to try to get back to the thing you're supposed to be doing. And then had been healthy for a little bit and then boom, significant injury, and he's like back at it again. Like that's gotta suck.
So you would definitely fix the Cowboys with your draft picks. Again, I think edge or interior D line, depending on the right guy, will be there in round 1. I think we're moving in the right direction for Dallas. Reset the trenches, get that new attitude, win in January type of offseason year here for Dallas. Draft a running back in the middle round. So that's round 4 for you, or they're missing a 4th, but even in the 5th, they'll be able to pick somebody up.
Yeah, that would have been the next pick.
Yeah, perfect. Cowboys fixed?
Yeah, sure.
I love when we get to the end of it. It's like, I don't know if we actually fixed it. We did our best. We're doing our best here. Speaking of doing our best, let's fix the Giants. Coming off of another disappointing season. Joe Shane's back. Brian Daboll's back. Quarterback is going to be the biggest question here. They're picking at 3. Remember, there was a point where we expected them to be able to pick 1 or 2 and have their choice. They're not there at the moment. Might need to trade up for it. Got about $28 million in cap space and 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 draft picks here. 1 in every round. First 4 rounds, couple 5s, couple 7s. So have some cap space and draft capital to turn things around. But as I've said before, I think coming off of a pretty good draft where I think they got several contributors last year and a potential star in Malik Neighbors, can they stomach the trade up here, give up some of those picks to ensure that they get one of the quarterbacks? Or, hey, if it just takes one of the teams, the Titans or the Browns, to pass on a quarterback, and you're at least going to get one of Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders.
So that's, look, I think about the only encouraging thing out of last season from them was that entire rookie class looked really good. Whether it's like really maybe every single draft pick made a significant contribution of some kind, but like Malik Neighbors, Tyler Newman at safety, Tyrone Tracy at running back, Theo Johnson at tight end, Andrew Phillips as a corner, like that entire group was all making significant impacts, which is just as well because almost nobody else on the team did. So, even guys like Dexter Lawrence, who was like on a defensive player of the year kind of run, gets hurt and misses a chunk of the season. So it was almost all bad from the Giants, but it has to start with finding an answer at quarterback. And the question simply, like, I don't think this team is really going to be in the free agent market or the trade market. The Darnolds, the Aaron Rodgers, they have to be focused on the draft, I would think. And then the only question is, are you confident enough that you can get a guy or the guy you like at 3, or do you have to go and trade and get the guy and just remove all doubt? And even then, if you're determined that you're going to have to trade, do you trade to 1 or do you trade to 2?
So bottom line is, we're not in the building. We don't have as much of the pure intel, what Tennessee's going to do, what Cleveland's going to do, having those conversations. I would say if we're in the seat, though, like, let's just make sure we get a QB, right? I know you might want Shadur. I might want Cam Ward. We don't have to necessarily agree on that, but let's go get a quarterback. Whether we feel like it has to be at 1 with Tennessee or has to be at 2 with Cleveland, I'm willing to give up some of those picks to go make that happen. Let's get the quarterback. Now, part of me is maybe skewed by where Joe Shane is in his life cycle as the general manager heading into year 4. That might skew things a little bit. It shouldn't, but it does, right? That's what the Giants, like, if they come out of this with just Travis Hunter, it's not going to feel great. Now, the alternative there is the second wave of draft quarterbacks are intriguing, Sam, right? We're getting a lot of people like, hey, the depth of the quarterback class is pretty good, but maybe there aren't stars, right? There's, Mike Renner's texting me about Dylan Gabriel, and you've got Shug. I'm calling him Shug from Louisville. I think that's people questioning my pronunciation there. Some people love him. Some people love Jackson Dart. Like, is there a chance that the Giants merely take a quarterback on the turn in the second round, or do they have to go get one in the first and make sure that they get one of the top 2 guys?
I can't see a world where the Giants can pass on QB at the top, or so either there's one of the 2 available at 3 and they pass on them, or they're both gone at 1 and 2 and people assume they missed out on them. Either way, like, not coming out of the first round quarterback and then grabbing a guy in the second, there's just no way you have confidence that that's your guy.
I wouldn't do it. I'm just saying. I think so. Let's go get the quarterback. Then this is the first team that I'm going to legitimately suggest signs Morgan Moses, right? I think they used a bit of, I think, our strategy of, hey, stitch together that offensive line and free agency last year. I just don't think they picked the right guys like John Runyon. I don't know if it didn't solve a whole lot up front. They were a little bit better. Evan Neal has never really developed. I think offensive linemen do develop at this point in his career, but do you really bank on him as the future right tackle? Morgan Moses, come on down, help solidify that. Second wave of free agency again to attack the O-line. I was a John Michael Schmitz fan. Center got a little bit better this year. That's generally, again, when a guy should improve, but are we ready to give up on him? Maybe. There's other centers in free agency, Drew Dahlmans, guys like that are more established. I think the Giants still have a lot more work to do on the O-line.
Yeah. I mean, you're in a situation again where, like, Andrew Thomas is really good as a left tackle, but the other 4 positions could easily be upgraded upon. And okay, they're for various different reasons, but nobody that's currently penciled in as a starter should be keeping you away from anything that potentially fixes one of those positions, whether it's a free agent, whether it's a trade, whether it's the draft. Like, all options should still be available for that offensive line.
And then there's the defensive line questions. Dexter Lawrence on the defensive interior, they need somebody next to him that can make plays. I think it could be a nice draft for the second round to maybe add another interior defensive lineman. Edge has been a multi-year issue, I think, for the Giants. Kayvon Thibodeau's been very inconsistent. Azeez Ojulari, a free agent. Brian Burns is there, but they could always use a little bit more depth there up front. So I think just overall D-line help for the Giants is needed. Levi Onwuzurike, got the pronunciation right there for Levi. I love him. Another one. He's going to be one of my Morgan Moseses this year for D-line needy teams. I think he would be a nice fit next to Dexter Lawrence. Maybe make it so you don't have to draft somebody in the second, but if they do go draft Alfred Collins out of Texas, TJ Sanders out of South Carolina, It's a good crop of, I think, that like picks 20 to 50, 60 interior defensive linemen that I think they could find somebody to help out next to Dexter Lawrence.
Yeah, Onwuzurike was a guy I was thinking of that would make some sense. Tershawn Wharton from the Chiefs as well, I think would make some sense as that kind of situational interior pass rusher for them as well. I think because of where they are, I think there's a ton of those mid-level offensive line free agents as well. Whether it's guys like Tevin Jenkins from the Bears, injury risk to him as well, but when he's played, he's actually been a pretty good offensive lineman.
Ooh, I like that a lot, by the way. Yeah. Tevin Jenkins to the Giants. Make that happen.
Yeah, like I think there's quite a few of those mid-level, mid-tier, range free agents that the Giants can try and do. The way that the Bengals a few years ago repaired their offensive line with like 3 guys that were all earning $10 million a year in free agency, right? And okay, that had a shelf life and a limit to it. Like the line is still not good, but it took it from being a catastrophe to being serviceable. There's a group of free agents this year, I think, that could do that for this Giants line.
Again, that's what the Giants tried to do last year. Jermaine Illuminor, John Runyon. Illuminor's fine.
Yeah, the strategy wasn't bad. They just took in some not great players.
And you probably have to do it again, right? That's the point with the Giants is they have to go do it again, upgrade it. They're still on the hook for Runyon, $10 million a year at left guard. I just don't know if that's, not improvable.
And to be fair, I think Illuminor should be a more useful player for them than he is, given where he should just make him the starting right tackle.
The other question is going to be Darius Slayton being a free agent. They have Malik Neighbors as the 1, Wan'Dale Robinson as your slot, wide receiver 2 for the Giants. And look, we always talk about, hey, you got to go get the QB, and the Giants certainly tried to last year. But a year from now, a year later, it's always like, hey, Malik Neighbors is a pretty nice weapon for the next quarterback, whether it's Shedeur, whether it's Cam Ward, whoever it might be. That is a nice weapon. What about a second weapon on the outside for the Giants? I think second wave of wide receivers in the draft, I think is solid. It's not top heavy, but I think the second wave's interesting. Another second round option there maybe for the Giants. Anything else that comes to mind at receiver?
And they can be, I think this is one of those spots where you can actually be quite one-dimensional with the player you're bringing in. I mean, Neighbors is that all-round, complete, everything one. You've got Wan'Dale Robinson, who's like a gimmicky slot option. Like if the missing piece on this team, and this theoretically should have been Jalen Hyatt, but he hasn't emerged into that player. Like if you found a sort of one-dimensional vertical threat to just put on that side and keep a defense honest, I think that's more than good enough. So that gives you a ton of flexibility to get those guys in the draft or, potentially in free agency.
Cornerback, there's some questions. I mean, there's a lot, I think, even though, look, there's a youth movement with the Giants. I liked their draft. We talked about their contributions there. But the beginning of the Joe Shane era, losing a lot of productive players, the Leonard Williams of the world, the Julian Loves of the world, Xavier McKinney's, you lost those dependable multi-year starters. You're in the middle of this youth movement. I think it just has to continue. So you're still rebuilding, right? It's not a great place to be 4 years into the stint for Shane, but at least it's young and moving in the right direction. And I was saying that about midseason, Sam, and then they started getting blown out left and right, thinking, hey, this is moving in the right direction. It ended pretty sour. But that coincided with them essentially tanking and saying, no more Daniel Jones. We're going to opt into this. So I think they're moving in the right direction, but still a lot of work to do as we list out all these needs and the fact that they need to be young in a lot of these spots.
I mean, honestly, it's a terrible place to be. They don't have a quarterback and their roster kind of stinks. And if it wasn't for the fact that they had an amazing draft class last year, we would be saying there's very little to be optimistic about for this Giants team whatsoever. But they did. So you have to, and this is maybe the reason that Joe Shane still has a job, is he can point to that group and say, look, I nailed every single draft pick last year effectively, right? This is the core of a team that can grow together and be really good down the line. But either you need to back it up and do it again, or at the very minimum, you need to find the quarterback that can have the kind of transformative effect that some of the rookies had a year ago and make you feel an awful lot better about everything that's around him, right? So, I mean, that really is the offseason for the Giants, is whether it's Cam Ward, whether it's Shedeur, whichever guy you like the best, you need to pick your guy, you need to make sure you get him, and then you need to make sure you're right, because that's what's going to determine whether everybody still has a job or not by the end of the year.
All right, just to recap on the Giants, I think we did a pretty good job here. If we do combine what we were talking about, bring in Morgan Moses to play right tackle, Tevin Jenkins to play right guard, Andrew Thomas is coming back, right? I think we've got a pretty solid offensive line. We're going up to go get one of our quarterbacks, regardless of what happens. We're going to use our second-round pick on an interior defensive lineman to pair next to Dexter Lawrence. I think we're moving in the right direction here for the Giants. Give us one more year. Unless that QB is Jaden Daniels transcendent, give us one more year to get back on track here with the Giants.
Yeah,
fixed.
And then some kind of vertical threat receiver in the mid rounds to be my number 2.
The fastest receiver you could find in round 3. Perfect offseason here for the Giants. All right, we'll get to the AFC East here in a minute, but Check the Mic is brought to you by our friends over at Timeline. You get 10% off your order of MitoPure over at timeline.com/checkthemic. MitoPure is a supplement that can help you because it encourages cellular renewal. It works by promoting an essential cellular cleanup process that clears out dysfunctional mitochondria, aka your cell's battery packs. There are no supplements on the market that have better clinical research shown to be effective at targeting the effects of age-related cellular decline. With regular use, you'll see and feel the difference in the form of improved energy levels, better workouts, faster recovery, more endurance, and more. In fact, MitoPure is shown to deliver double-digit increases in muscle strength and endurance without a change in exercise. This is your year to be your best, most energized, most revitalized, so you can awaken the strength, power, and resilience already in you with the first and only supplement clinically proven to rejuvenate health at the cellular level. Again, Timeline's offering 10% off your order of MitoPure. Go to timeline.com/checkthemic. That's TIMELINE.com/checkthemic. On to the AFC East. We're going to start with the Buffalo Bills. Man, every offseason coming off of just a heartbreak, disappointment, couple point loss, usually to the Chiefs. And the question is, how do we get over the hump? How do we get over the hump if we're the Buffalo Bills? And it's an interesting spot because last year they did a little roster reset, right? It was a whole bunch of veterans that they moved on from, Mitch Morse and their safeties and Tre'Davious White, a lot of the core players of the early Josh Allen AFC East dominant run. They all moved on, replaced by a whole bunch of younger players. And the Bills didn't miss a beat, man. There was still a similar team, probably even better last year, still coming out with the same heartbreak, but it's a roster that got younger, reset things a little bit, showed that they could compete, and they remain, hate saying this, but a couple players away. You're never really a couple players away, but they're always going to be in the mix, right? And there's fewer, I think, fixes needed in Buffalo now than maybe there even were a year ago when they started to make these decisions to get younger and go with the youth movement.
Yeah, I think this is why it's tricky sometimes, self-scouting and evaluating where you are after any given season. Obviously, it feels like just the same old story again for Buffalo. Like, we came up just short. Again, we were just, same story. But I think if you adjust that for the expectations going into the season, you would conclude, actually, we overachieved this year. Like, if you go back, not even a year, if you go back sort of, 9-10 months or whatever it was, post-draft, post-free agency going into last season, there were a lot of people that did not expect Buffalo to be a legit contender. And then they came out of the gate looking... they came out of the gate hot, and they were much better than I think people expected them to be, and they were setting the pace for a lot of that season. That I think they overachieved last year. That was supposed to be something of a competitive rebuild, maybe a little bit better than a competitive rebuild because you've got Josh Allen, you've got a lot of bones in place. But I think they were expected to take a step back last season, not be a number 1 seed contender type of team, and just sort of get in all these new pieces and rebuild a couple of positions. And actually it ended up that they did that and were able to still be really good, which has meant that, now they still have some pieces to fix, but they, I think, overachieved relative to what they should have done. It's not just, this is like, we've reached our ceiling, this can't get any better. It's like, no, you did some serious work to reinforce things last season, and now you have, I think, a couple of clear areas to address. And then, maybe if you underachieve again next year, maybe we can have that conversation.
Bills are over the cap by about 10 plus million at the moment. We know all that stuff gets restructured, but they might not have massive flexibility. They were one of the early teams discussed as far as Myles Garrett goes. Maybe they could find a way to make that happen. They do have an extra second rounder that, could come into play. I think it was from the Stephon Diggs trade. So that could be on the table. But when you look at the depth chart Amari Cooper moves on as a free agent. They grabbed him for the half season. Kind of worked, not really though. I mean, it was good for a little bit. Didn't really make the impact I think maybe that they hoped. Mac Hollins a free agent, so receiver needs some help. Rasul Douglas, cornerback 2, or cornerback starter, essentially opposite Christian Benford, and then DeMar Hamlin, a free agent at safety. But there's not a whole lot of, say, listed starters that are massive holes for this team. Do they want to upgrade, add depth on the D-line like every other team? Yes. Maybe they want to get younger at linebacker or continue to get young at linebacker. There's a few spots there, future-proof the offensive line. But as we're saying, not a whole bunch of massive needs, but some important ones when we talk about a starting corner, what they want to do at receiver, and then the depth on the D-line.
Yeah, I think they have those sort of 2 or 3 easy spots that they definitely need to figure out an answer for. Look, the last season, the big story going into the year, given what they did with Keon Coleman in the draft, was do they have an ex-wide receiver to replace Stephon Diggs? And if not, does it work without one? Well, they didn't really have one, and it worked most of the time without one, but I think there were times where that showed up as a problem, and they need a solution for that this offseason. Like, you can't go into the season again with no clear recognized X receiver type of talent on this roster. I think they recognized that when they made the trade for Amari Cooper, they needed somebody that they could trust to win in those situations, and they never really had one. So figure out an answer at X wide receiver this offseason. Defensive line, like Gregory Rousseau is really good. Ed Oliver is good. That's basically it. I mean, Von Miller flashed at times last season, but hasn't made the impact that they would have hoped when they brought him over. They need more impact on that defensive line, which impacts the secondary. And the secondary, I think, is the last spot, which needs some upgrades.
All right, so let me go back to the X receiver thing for a bit. I don't know if there's a good option. Like, what are the options for a true X receiver other than kind of hoping Keon Coleman, who showed some good flashes in year 1, kind of hoping that he develops? I don't know if they have a ton of options.
Not that type of player.
I get what he's not, but they thought that he was. He wasn't. Was he completely not that in year 1? Can he? Do you have any more faith that he could do that after seeing him as a rookie with Josh Allen?
No, I mean, everything that he did well last season was all of in the category of things we expect Keon Coleman to do well, not in the category of, what if he actually develops in this area, he can become our X receiver. It was like he won some contested catches, and outside of that, it was other non-X receiver things. Like, they don't have anybody they can put on the outside against single coverage who can win down the sideline. That's the missing skill set in this offense.
All right, so the chat is suggesting Devontae Adams. We haven't mentioned Adams a ton as an option here. Certainly going to be moving on from the Jets. Of course, that's a division rival and all, but could that be a play? Because there's not a whole lot of, hey, go win one-on-one on the outside type of receivers available, especially once T. Higgins gets locked up by the Bengals. Is Devontae Adams potentially that guy to pair with Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, and the tight ends here?
I mean, maybe it's an option, but you're talking about the Jets needing to play ball for that to be a likely option. Or them.
We'll get to the Jets in a minute. I mean, if Mike T actually hired me for the Jets, I'm probably like you probably have to punt on this year if you're the Jets. And so helping the Bills in the short term, I don't know that really comes into play if you're the Jets needing to think long term. If I'm the Jets, I'm thinking 2026. We'll talk about them in about 30 minutes here.
I mean, I still think you don't want to help your division rival, regardless of whether it's. I mean, there will be other teams that are interested.
He's a cut candidate, trade candidate. Yeah, he's both. But anyway, that's one of the few options. Are there any other options at X?
I mean, a guy like Marquise Brown, his entire season for Kansas City was basically a write-off. Got hurt, just about made it back for the end of the season, but effectively they didn't get to see what that was supposed to be. And I think that was supposed to answer a similar question within the Chiefs receiving core. You thought you had Rashee Rice as your kind of volume slot guy. You thought you had Xavier Worthy as the rookie speedster, and then Marquise Brown, I think, was supposed to be the X that could win on the outside, and he gets hurt almost immediately. You basically never got to see what that offense was supposed to look like with that collection of talent. I mean, tough shit for the Chiefs, but for the Bills, it might be, maybe they can go to the same well and say, all right, Marquise Brown, somebody that a former first round pick who's generally underwhelmed in his career, but theoretically this is his role.
I love that option, by the way. I can't remember if I put him down in my notes or maybe for someone else, but I love the Marquise Brown option potentially for the Bills. Because remember, we said they felt like they were calibrated for the new NFL, bunch of slot receivers, bunch of yak heavy type of guys. Let's get a deep threat here again for Josh Allen, because obviously we know he can stretch the field. I like Marquise Brown as a compliment here. Potentially, I like Devontae Adams also as an option. The other part that I think might play out pretty well for the Bills, picking late first, that same group of corners that I think, the Benjamin Morrisons, Javon Ravel, throw Jedi Barron in there from Texas. I think all of those guys would be good fits in the late first, and fit and need and value, I think, there for the Bills. I think that might play out pretty well for them to take a shot on one of the injured corners, or at least a good late first, early second round type of corner. And I also think a lot of the D-line options in the second round would also match well with where the Bills are picking.
A ton of people are matching them up with defensive tackles as well at the bottom of that first round. Kenneth Grant, I know I gave him to Dallas at 12, but Kenneth Grant is somebody that like everyone wants to see him drop to Buffalo. At least Bills fans do, I think, as a guy to pair next to Ed Oliver. But I think there's a couple of defensive tackles that are being talked about at that spot as well. So yeah, defensive tackle, cornerback, like that bottom of the first round pick, I think will be a pretty good spot to address at least one of these significant needs.
Yeah, and remember, they have, as I said earlier, 2 second-round picks. So if they want to get into the Myles Garrett thing, they'd have to do a whole lot of cap manipulation and restructuring, and figure out how they would make that work. Maybe they have the extra 2 to do that. But if they're not even going to do that, they have pick 30, but also 56 and 62, pretty close there in the second round.
The Garrett thing feels like a move that, like, that's the panic move, right? Like if the Bills get into the Myles Garrett sweepstakes and try and make that trade happen this offseason, that feels like they have looked at this season. Their analysis has been same old thing, right? Same ceiling we ran into. This is what we need to do, something fundamentally different. We need to shake it up. We need to disrupt the status quo, do something crazy, and go get a Myles Garrett. I feel like that's the wrong conclusion to draw from the season that they just had, based off, again, the expectations for them heading into the season. I think that would be extremely reactionary and not necessarily smart. So I think you look at that and you say, minimum, we achieved expectations. Actually, we probably overachieved expectations. So now let's figure out where we get an X receiver from. Let's go get a defensive lineman that can make an impact, and let's go repair the secondary a bit. We can do all that without like mortgaging everything for Myles Garrett.
Mohall already mentioned, and where I was going to go with that, I do wonder how much the fact that they already made the Von Miller move a couple of years ago hurts them. The other name that I brought up was Khalil Mack. By the way, remember when Khalil Mack and Von Miller's careers were like perfectly paralleled? We were trying to rank them every year when we were working at PFF, and it was like, this guy's 7, this guy's 8 in the entire NFL. Like, they were always together. But Khalil Mack, I don't know what kind of market he's going to have. He could still play, man. And I don't know if that's like a 1 or 2 year, heavy deal or what it looks like, but that's a cheaper version of Myles Garrett for a guy that isn't Myles Garrett, but maybe can still play. And it would be fascinating to see Myles Garrett and Khalil Mack and Von Miller perhaps on the same team. But I do wonder if the Bills are gun shy at all going back down the veteran edge well, because the Von Miller thing hasn't really worked out.
Bring Mack back to Buffalo.
That's right. Buffalo legend, Khalil Mack.
I think it probably, I mean, yeah, so it was a less massive deal, but I do feel like the Von Miller deal to bring him in was a little bit, it was the same family of ideas, right? Like, let's do something a little bit outside of the realms of what we know is sensible, hoping that it will pay off, right? That's what the Myles Garrett thing I think would be. It's like, I know this isn't a smart move, like it's not playing the percentages, but the payoff is big enough that it's worth the gamble, is effectively what that would be.
Man, I would love to see it. I would still love to see it. All right, man. Have we bottom line is, I think, play the cut game, right? The Devontae, if he gets cut, like, play in that world, at least inquire about Garrett, see if you could pull that off. I think so. There's a few of those power moves, But then there's also this like stay the course type of moves where I think the cornerback draft, the defensive tackle draft, I think those are going to line up to fit some of the Bills' needs and just stay the course there as far as building through the draft. And if you use those 3 picks in the top 62, I think they have a chance to get 3 really good players that can make an impact just, already in year 1. Fixed?
Yep.
All right, let's go to the Miami Dolphins. They're at man, as I was looking through their stuff, they're in a tough spot, right? Because I think they have they were the team that went for it a couple years ago before the 2022 season. They trade for Tyreek Hill. They trade for Jalen Ramsey, right? They were the go for it team, right? They were the team that made the flashiest moves, and they worked, right? They worked theoretically, not like they didn't win a Super Bowl, they didn't win a division, but they worked in the sense that the offense got turned around and they became a competitive playoff caliber team, at least when their starting quarterback has been healthy, right? So it worked in that sense. Where it doesn't work is, okay, we're at the spot where the depth issues are up and down the roster. O-line, D-line, receiver 3, all over the place. So you're dealing with +2 has been paid now, right? They went for it on the first contract for Tua. Now he's been paid. So now you're dealing with, okay, how do we fix a lot more issues maybe than we had 3 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, like, so you went into this, and I'm like, okay, your first issue is like you had the stuff that happened with Tyreek Hill immediately after the end of the season where he's like, I'm out of here. And now he's like, no, I was just emotional. I'm okay. But, either way, you're dealing with an aging Tyreek Hill who's shown frustration that things have not been working out well. That's at least a conversation internally and a discussion and a figuring out of what are we doing with Tyreek? What are we doing with that whole world? Then you've got an offensive line, all of those Shanahan teams, right? The teams that for years had been able to mask bad offensive lines on paper. Well, it all like the bill became due for all of them last year. Houston, Miami, San Francisco, each one of them dealt with varying degrees of offensive line problems, which undermined everything they were trying to do on offense. Miami now goes into a season again with a bad looking offensive line on paper that needs serious remedial work. But then, so I think those are the sort of 2 acute, issues to address. But then you look at the rest of the roster, and my overwhelming impression was just like, what are we doing? Like, what is this? This is just a collection of some guys that is miles away from contending, apparently. And I don't know what the approach is. Like, I don't know what is the direction we're heading in. It's like you said, they made a bunch of aggressive moves. It hasn't worked out in that, Tua got hurt. The things have stalled generally, and now they don't feel any closer to contending than they were at the start of this whole process.
So remember how we compared them to the Cowboys a couple years ago, where they were a good team, they were a flashy team that put up a lot of points, beat up on bad teams, but didn't beat good teams. I don't know what the final record was, but over the last 2 years, there was whether 3-10 or 2-10 against teams with winning records. I don't know how you solve that, but I do feel like Miami's going to come back and reset and kind of go this old school football mentality. We need to be able to run the ball and stop the run in these good games and against these better teams. And I do wonder if it's a similar analysis to Dallas, where they spend the year resetting. And, I do believe Philly winning in their annual investment in the offensive and defensive line is going to influence teams. I really do. I mean, it's old school football adages, but we know what happens. As soon as a team wins the Super Bowl, it's like, that's it. That's the way to do it. And Miami was already probably dealing with these issues. I think it's both lines this offseason, because they went the other way, man, right? They went with the shiny objects. They went Tyreek Hill. They went Jalen Ramsey. They went all the perimeter players, and it got them to a point, but the foundation wasn't strong enough. And I do believe it's time to get back to some of the foundation building for the Dolphins.
But this is the thing, is that they've kind of lurched from one thing to the other. Like, they also invested in the defensive front as well, albeit in a different way. I mean, they made the move for Bradley Chubb. That was a needle mover. Jalen Phillips is a first rounder. Chop Robinson is a high draft pick. Like, they've invested in it, but then they let guys like Christian Wilkins walk in free agency rather than pay him. So they threw money at one and they've invested in the other in a different way. But you're still but like, you just come back to, like, even though they've had all this investment in various areas, like Calais Campbell might have been their best defensive player, and he's ancient and is presumably leaving in free agency. Zach Sealer is their other best defensive player, and he's just the guy that they stumbled upon during the course of general roster construction. Jalen Phillips is a good player. Chop Robinson is a good player, but you still look at the defensive line. You're like, this thing still needs certainly some depth issues. Linebacker is a mess. They don't have a safety right now. Like, they're basically all hitting free agency. And cornerback is Jalen Ramsey, and then everything else is a question mark. So offense is relatively set, other than the fact that the offensive line is extremely weak on paper, but the whole defense is like in transition.
With $15 million over the cap, have 10 draft picks at least, a lot of them late in the draft, but 3 in the top 100, so that's good. And so there's I think, and remember, they hit a stretch where they didn't draft a ton, and so I think those things are adding up, right? They didn't have a ton of draft picks over a few year period, and then they had, gave up. Part of that was giving up picks to go get Tyreek and Ramsey and the whole thing, losing a first rounder and the whole deal. It's a get younger type of season for the Dolphins, which isn't a write-off, but it's a build through the draft time. They got pick 13, they have pick 48. Another team, I think, offensive and defensive linemen available there at 13, especially defensive line could be a way to go there. But as you say, they've got many spots to fill. So I think when we talk about the O-line, Kevin Zeitler, the 1-year flyer on him, and a lot of these are 1-year fixes to buy you time to build everything else, because you can't whack-a-mole the entire thing in 1 year. I think Kevin Zeitler would be a nice fit if they could get him down there. James Daniels at guard as a buy low. Aaron Banks is a free agent coming from the Niners, has the scheme familiarity, of course, played for Mike McDaniel before. I think those guys are all solid starters that could at least help on one of the spots there for the Dolphins. And then draft-wise, Tyler Booker, is he in play at as high as 13 as the best guard in the draft, or Amon Membu from Missouri, who's got tackle guard versatility?
Well, that also might be a really nice landing spot if, we talked before about how I've never seen a tackle class before where all of the top guys, the word guard is associated with them somewhere pretty high up, right? When you look at profiles or rankings or whatever, the Dolphins might end up being the beneficiary of something like that. Like, if not enough teams think that a Kelvin Banks can play tackle, he might be sitting there at 13 for Miami to pounce on as a guard and say, we don't care if he can play tackle. If he can play right tackle, we can put him there, because, Austin Jackson has not been good, but we also need guards desperately. So that versatility is actually a plus for them.
I love that suggestion, Sam, because you also have Teron Armstead at left tackle. I know they drafted Patrick Paul in the second round last year, kind of struggled as a rookie when he needed to step in, but Teron Armstead, great when he's out there, always a health concern. I saw some rumors that maybe he was going to be a cut candidate. Like, I can't see the Dolphins. I can't see them wanting to do that, just because it's just another, where are you going to find the next left tackle? But Kelvin Banks might give you that future left tackle security and that early guard play. I actually love that as a potential fit for the Dolphins at 13.
Yeah, and I think the same thing is true with Will Campbell, though I think he's less likely to be the guy that slides. But same idea, right? If the teams don't think that he can play left tackle and he's seen as a guard, and that's the kind of thing that can drop you from a top 5 type of draft pick to the 10 to 15 range.
As far as the safeties go, I feel like that's the last thing I want to address. The way the safety market has gone, the Kevin Byards, Justin Simmons didn't really have a good year, but there are starting caliber safeties who get cut late. They signed for 1 year, $6 million. I mean, I think they're going to have to play that game. Javon Holland, they're not going to franchise tag him, let him hit the market, which is probably the right move. I'm not going to spend a ton of money at safety. So it doesn't feel great, but you're probably going to have to play cut down game and second wave there as far as safety goes.
I mean, I think, not that it's easy, but I think there's going to be a ton of value in the safety market this season for teams. I mean, you can get guys, like a Julian Blackmon or a Cameron Bynum from Minnesota. These are going to be guys, I think, that sign for very modest contracts just because there's such a glut of availability. So even though Miami doesn't have much money to spend, they can presumably find that kind of deal. I mean, Justin Simmons is going to end up being a free agent again. Maybe, okay, he had a bad year in Atlanta, but this is a guy that's very not far removed from being one of the best safeties in the league.
Going back to the defensive line as well. Remember last year at this time, Christian Wilkins walks. Zach Sealer is the only guy with Not only experience, but just good play. As you mentioned, they added Calais Campbell late. He's a Miami guy. I don't know if they're going to be able to do that one more time and steal another 1 year, $2 million contract out of Calais Campbell just because he's from the area. If you can, great. But that interior defensive line absolutely needs to be addressed. Once again, deep defensive line class. This feels like a world where they could maybe double up at that position in the draft. So I could see a guard tackle, 2 defensive tackles, even with their first 3 picks, and feel pretty good about that. I think as far as reshaping where this roster is going.
I mean, if Calais Campbell wants to play one more year, I would do that without hesitation for them.
Yeah, guys pushing our age and still playing. Remember, he wanted to maybe get released and go chase a ring late. I don't know if he's going to see the Dolphins as the ring chasers. Again, culturally, I'm really interested in where this thing shifts. You're right. Like Tyreek Hill, I think can still play, but he's not the type that ages gracefully, I don't think, because of how dependent he is on speed and quicks. So at some point, are you going to reshape this from like the flashy throw the ball, not even outside the numbers, but throw the ball to your receivers a ton? And there was a lot of games last year where they started to pivot, right? The Jonnu Smith games, they're throwing over the middle of the field. They're mixing it up. I do wonder how much they're going to try to, how do we get over the hump against good teams, win with the run, stop the run, do a little bit more inside out than maybe they have, especially offensively, right? Over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be fascinating generally to see what that scheme starts to look like, because you've got the fact that it has the potency of it seems to have worn off, but you've also, that was the landing spot for our friend Bobby Slowick, fired as offense coordinator from the Texans. He reunites with Mike McDaniel in Miami, as 2 guys that worked together under Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco. I mean, that's an intriguing landing spot for him as well. So you've now got, multiple minds from that Shanahan system all working to try and figure out how to get this thing back on track.
All right, man. Have we fixed the Miami Dolphins?
I mean, a little bit.
Trench warfare up front. We got this. Guard tackle, couple defensive tackles, second wave of safety free agency, second wave of offensive line free agency to reshape that thing. I think we're moving in the right direction. They don't have to sign Morgan Moses, though.
I mean, they could.
They could. They always could.
He's better than Austin Jackson.
That's true. He is an upgrade over most. All right, let's go to the Jets. Morgan Moses' old team. I'm actually not going to suggest that they bring him back, because my whole deal with the Jets is we're thinking 2026. Reset the whole thing. Reset the entire thing, Sam. Aaron Rodgers, everybody that came with him, everybody that's ever talked to Aaron Rodgers, get him out, reset the whole thing. We're thinking 2026 if we're the Jets.
It's like the opposite of the Sean McVay thing. Anyone that's ever had a cup of coffee with Aaron Rodgers, anyone that's ever shared a cup of mud water with Aaron Rodgers is getting turfed out of the building immediately.
Mud water. Just lost that future sponsorship.
I didn't say it was a bad thing. I'm just saying that's definitely what Rodgers drinks.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest thing is move on.
As an independent thinker, Rodgers has definitely come to the conclusion through his own research that mud water, that mushroom drinks are the things to be consuming instead of coffee. 100% guarantee that man has a shelf, all that's there in the New York apartment, wherever he was living, right? You open the shelves.
Liquid mushrooms.
Yeah, exactly. Mushroom drinks, start to finish.
I have not moved on from coffee yet, so we're going to... beautiful. Any coffee sponsors out there that want to be the official coffee of Check the Mic, please feel free to reach out. So I'm in reset the whole thing mode here, Sam. And I don't know I don't remember if I said this in my interview. Maybe I should have been more clear. We're thinking 2026 if we're the Jets, but we got to lock up the nucleus. I mean, before we do anything else, Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, couple first rounders from a couple of years ago, right? A great draft. I want Garrett Wilson to know he's a Jet for life for the foreseeable future. I want Sauce Gardner to know the same, even though he's coming off a down year. I want to lock up the nucleus and move on from the old guys.
How are you going to convince Garrett Wilson to stay in the building? I mean, man doesn't seem to be happy there at the moment.
He'll be fine. Just Aaron Glenn, leader of men. He'll take care of him.
And are you going to stop Sauce playing golf?
Yes. The man's no longer allowed to pick up a golf club. His wit without splits. Witt without splits, Witt golf without golf. It's like night and day. Without
It's
golf,
like,
he is first team All Pro. Witt golf, he's jag, just another corner.
like I think teams fairly routinely put things in contracts like, you can't be riding ATVs around out there in case you break your spine and, your value to us as an asset is gone. You're going to have the golf thing written into Sauce's contract.
That's right. No golf for Sauce.
Got it.
Beyond that, I mean, I think they're a ways away, right? You have both tackles, Tyler Smith and Morgan Moses, hitting free agency. Of course, they future-proof the left tackle position with Olu Fashanu, so he steps in at left tackle. So one starting tackle spot, we'll say. One of your tight ends in Tyler Conklin, free agent, and 3/5 of the secondary. DJ Reed, slot, Isaiah Oliver, Chuck Clark, all free agents. Reed, the biggest one as a starting corner. So they need help at safety. They need a starting corner or two, if you include nickel. Defensive line depth, as always, and a starting tackle, just as a starting point. And then, oh, by the way, who's the quarterback of the future for the Jets? We have to make a decision on that, picking at 7 overall, where you don't really have, one of those first-round choices unless you're going to make a move to go up. But I'm not doing that because I'm looking to 2026, as I already said.
So that's the thing. Like, to me, I mean, the most pressing question is obviously, like, who the hell is the quarterback? Because you're picking at a level where I don't think many people are expecting either of the top 2 quarterbacks to be available there, right? So whereas the Giants might be able to play the game of saying one of them will be there at 3, the Jets can't play that game, or they can, but they have to play that assuming that you're not getting one at that point. Hey, if we get one, great. If we don't, we're willing to do what the Raiders did and like roll into a season with, Tyrod Taylor, a quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, somebody in the chat a while back asked, like, what's our definition of a bridge quarterback? I would define it as, a guy that you don't think is your long-term future, but the phrase we always use, top 32 starter in the NFL, right? Gardner Minshew is, over the last couple of years, I think he's around 32, right? Top 32 starter. Jameis Winston, top 32 starter. I think Marcus Mariota, when he was a bridge quarterback, was probably in that discussion. Coming into the season, Sam Darnold was probably fringe, top 32, and he turned out to be really good. But it's a guy that doesn't make it look like you're tanking, right? He's going to give you reasonable performance. And if you put a great supporting cast around the bridge quarterback, you might have a Case Keenum year. You might have a Sam Darnold year, right? Where these guys make runs and win a lot of games. But I think that's what that guy is. But it's just, you can't put a guy that is just awful out there and like legitimately tank. You can't really do that, right? You can't take Nathan Peterman and say, you're our 17 game starter because Arch Manning is our pick next year. We have to get Arch Manning. Like, nobody can really do that. So you need a guy who's a reasonable starter, and a guy like Tyrod Taylor can do that for you. And I think the Jets are probably in that bridge world, while also, by the way, I would dive into the second wave of draft quarterbacks. Yeah. I would take a shot on any of those guys, pick 42 wherever in the second round, and take a shot and get somebody in the building with an eye toward next year as well.
Yeah, your value to this team is the magnitude of which you're terrible. That's what you're bringing to the table for this year. No, I agree. Like, if they are going in the bridge quarterback world, like the big problem that the Jets have is the one the Raiders had, the last couple of years, is you need a quarterback. You're not necessarily well positioned to get one in any capacity, right? So they're going to eat a ton of dead cap money when they get rid of Rodgers. If they do it with the pre-June 1st designation, it's like $50 million a dead hit. If they do it post-June 1st, they get to spread it out over this year and next year. So it's like $23 million this year, 14 next year. You can spread the pain. I would imagine that's what they're going to try and do, as opposed to eating it all this year. But who knows? Either way, that kind of rules you out of like big money quarterback markets. I would actually think, if it wasn't for the fact that he was a Jet already, the Sam Darnold thing would actually make quite a lot of sense for the Jets. But just because that's where he started, I can't imagine them doing that this time around. That's where
he started, the media, the memories.
It would be insane.
The ghosts, it's not.
But it actually does make a reasonable amount of sense for them. I just can't imagine them wanting to do that. I can't imagine either side being interested in that because of how his career started. So if you're in this world of like, we don't really have a solid answer at quarterback, we're probably not getting one at the top of the draft. We don't want to, unlike the Giants, who might be able to package something palatable to go from 3-2 or 3-1. You got to go further. You got to put together the kind of package that the Panthers put together, right? To jump from 9-1, which is a lot more painful. So you're in the bridge quarterback world. And if you're in the bridge quarterback world, I don't think you're looking outside of Tyrod Taylor. Like there's just as good a chance that Tyrod can steer the ship for a year and not be a catastrophe as there is Kirk Cousins or Justin Fields or Russell Wilson or Jameis can do that. So keep with the guy that's in the building and let him do it.
Yeah, at least as a starting point, like you pair him with Tyler Shugg, Jackson Dart, Dylan Gabriel. You pair him with one of those guys and let them compete and see. And it's not going to feel. Look, it's not going to feel great for a year. But what did the Jets do a couple of years ago? They went and made this move, and it wasn't just to go get Aaron Rodgers. It was to get Aaron Rodgers and his offensive coordinator and his wide receiver 2 and his wide receiver 1. Right, we got all those guys. Right, so we have to undo a lot. Right, we're not just undoing a quarterback situation; we're undoing everything that he came with. And I'm not talking about the culture stuff, but it's probably a part of it. You're undoing a lot here because of all the moves that were made the last couple of years.
Well, unlike the Giants, so I basically said this was a bad move for the Giants, right? Passing on quarterback at the top and going with a second wave guy in the second round or even lower. The problem with them is they do have a shot of getting one of the top guys, right? You would be actively saying, no, we're going away from a guy that has theoretically a very good chance of working out to somebody that doesn't. The Jets don't have that shot, right? Their chance of a Cam Ward or a Shadur Sanders theoretically is going to involve a lot more, giving up a lot more than it is for the Giants to get that guy. So the Jets would be saying, look, we basically don't think that there's a realistic chance of getting a guy this year. So we're going to let Tyrod steer the ship for a year. We're probably focusing on next year's draft, but we'll also roll the dice on a Dylan Gabriel who's got the Bo Nix, the Bo Nix like started a million games in college deal from multiple different programs. Like we'll see if Dylan Gabriel's incredible experience at the college level somehow magically turns him into a good starting NFL quarterback quite quickly. Like that's absolutely a roll of the dice that the Jets should take that is distinct from the Giants, turning down effectively a much better quarterback theoretically.
So I like that, right? And then in the vein of we're thinking 2026 internally, right? We're not going to tell the media this. You mentioned like a guy like Jedrick Wills, right? Former first-round pick, never really put it together, but knowing that O linemen can bloom in years 4, 5, and 6. I always 3 through 6, whatever those years are, right? I would even make free agent signings like that, right? So the reason why I give Morgan Moses to everybody is I know he's going to be dependable, usually healthy, sneaky top 10 right tackle play, and if we're trying to compete right now and we have a massive need at right tackle, Morgan Moses. But if you're thinking to the future, Alaric Jackson, who you mentioned, right? Do you bring in these guys that might be on the on the up and up here, on the ascension from an O-line perspective? Those are the types of players, and you take a shot on them and see are they going to be a part of our rebuild in 2026. I love those types of players for the Jets where they are in their life cycle right now.
Yeah, I don't know what his market is going to look like, but I would treat Jedrick Wills kind of the way the Eagles treated Mekhi Becton last offseason, right? This guy that effectively has been cast off and written off. They bring him in just to kick the tires. Like he wasn't supposed to start for them, and he ends up just beating out effectively a guy at right guard and becoming their starter. Like I would bring in Jedrick Wills as a shot to nothing. Like let's just kick the tires and see. And my theory for him would be, I'm going to work him at right tackle and see if we get a much closer approximation to the college version of that player than the guy who was moved to the other side of the line and never looked particularly good for the Cleveland Browns. Like I would absolutely bring him in, work him at right tackle, and see if he beats out the guy that I've got penciled in as a starter there.
So Jedrick Wills is coming in to protect the sometimes blind side when you're looking to the left side of the field of Tyrod Taylor. This is great. Jets fans are going to love this rebuild. We're rolling with Tyrod, who's competing with Dylan Gabriel. And look, if Gabriel's out there, it's his blind side. There we go. Jedrick Wills protecting him at right tackle. Can we trade Devontae Adams? We're getting rid of Devontae. We know that's happening. I had another free agent I wanted to look at. Mike Jackson, who I our friend Eric Eager, in the Panthers brought in right before the season and got some good time. I don't know what the market looks like for him, but he's improving, right? Long corner, had a pretty nice season for the Panthers. He could be the guy opposite Sauce, another, young guy that could be a part of the 2026 and beyond rebuilds. Those are the types of free agents I really want to look at if I'm the Jets. Yeah, you got to fill some needs and fill some holes, but I want to do it with as many younger upside type of free agents as possible. And not a ton of those guys exist, but I think that's the crop you're trying to pull from as much as you can.
Yeah, I think that defensive line needs a lot of work as well. Like a couple of years ago, we were talking about the Jets defensive line the same way we talk about the Eagles defensive line, right? They're 7 deep. They can get pressure from everywhere. Like they've got such an incredible rotation. That's sort of fallen by the wayside really quickly. And, they made that, they were it wasn't strictly speaking one transaction, so it's not like it was a trade, but the Eagles and the Jets effectively swapped Bryce Huff and Hassan Reddick this time a year ago, and neither worked out. Like both sides of that non-deal were complete farces. Like they were complete fiascos. Hassan Reddick didn't report for most of the season, then eventually showed up because his new agent convinced him it was stupid not to. But Reddick made almost no useful contribution to this team. And then Bryce Huff was a healthy scratch for the Super Bowl, on a team that was running deep with defensive linemen, decided this guy just wasn't worth putting out there. So all of a sudden, this defensive rotation for the Jets, it's Quinnen Williams, who's still really good. Jermaine Johnson as your sort of power edge. Will McDonald, who's a good situational rusher, but maybe not as good as the sack stat, the breakout, sack figure from a year ago.
Probably have to get him off the field on early downs as much as possible.
Yeah, but you're looking at that group and you're like, this is not terrifying the way it used to be.
Yeah, so defensive line depth absolutely needs to be addressed. They have 4 picks in the top 108. They have pick 92 and 108 in there. I think one of those has to be a quarterback, and then get your O-line, D-line depth like everyone else. Maybe they play in the corner market. I like the idea of everything, though, is steered toward the future for this year. We're not trying to win this year. We're not doing 1-year Band-Aids. We're looking at players that can be a part of 26 and beyond. After we lock up, after we have a good sit down with Garrett Wilson, we take the clubs out of Sauce's hands, maybe even talk about Jermaine Johnson, those 3 first-rounders from 2022. It was a really good draft, man. Those are 3 good picks. Johnson was hurt last year, but he was on his way up, coming off of 23. I think they get those guys locked up for the future and start building.
A low second tier, again, middle class of free agent I would be interested in bringing in, who ticks your box of like for the future as well, also helps repair that defensive line. Malcolm Kuntz, like bring that guy in to platoon with Will McDonald as your pass rushing side.
I may have suggested him for our next team. Have we fixed the Jets? Maybe not for 25, but for the future.
I mean, we're getting there.
We're on our way. Jets, we're on our way. What was my slogan a couple years ago? We're going to get better. Still applies. We're going to get better.
Slogan.
Going to get better. All right, let's wrap up the AFC and NFC East show with the New England Patriots coming off another disappointing season, picking at number 3 overall. But they have the quarterback, right? They have picking at 4 overall. They have Drake May. Right, so you have that at least solved. Now you just have to fix the offensive line, every pass catcher, the defensive line, the defense as a whole. A lot to do in New England, but at least Drake May is in town.
At least Drake May is there. Nothing else is, but Drake May is. So, yeah, the good news is they got a ton of cap space to spend. Like they're the team with the war chest to go nuts. And okay, the last time they went crazy in free agents with spending, it didn't work that well. But we got to do it. We got to deploy the war chest and go buy some players.
The first time, and remember my funny joke, well, that was the first year Nick Caserio had left. I was like, oh, Nick Caserio's been holding Belichick down because Bill went nuts. It was his first year that he really went crazy in free agency. He started paying, what did he pay for? Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, Jalen Mills.
He made, I mean, even just that, right? He made 2 different tight ends, the highest paid tight end in the NFL in the same offseason.
Kendrick Bourne, Nelson Aguilar. I'm trying to remember all the names. And Hunter Henry's still around. Like some of them were pretty good, but it was a lot of overpaying for mid-tier free agents. And look, New England might be in that spot now, right? I mean, this isn't this. It used to be the spot where Tom Brady was there, and it's like, oh, people are going to take this discount to go win a ring. Now it's like, who wants to go to New England right now? Maybe Drake May will be more attractive for potential free agents, but they probably have to overpay. So in my strategy here, I think the O-line needs to be addressed first. And you talked about their cap space. Every team is looking at, well, Trey Smith is the top guard on the market, and he's going to be making over $20 million a year. Like the Patriots have the money to just overpay for Trey Smith and just start with that in the O-line overhaul, at least.
Yeah, the only downside of that is the one player in that offensive line you would say probably doesn't need to be replaced is Michael Onwenu, and that's where they want to play him.
Good point.
Now,
I mean,
Onwenu can play right tackle. Like maybe you just solve it and say, okay, we think you're best at right guard. We also know you can play right tackle, so that's where you're playing because we just paid Trey Smith.
Would have done that a year ago anyway had Onwenu play right tackle. But my second point, though, is that the Patriots should sign Morgan Moses. So maybe it doesn't all work out exactly as you said, but they could sign Morgan Moses. Maybe just keep Onwenu, sign Morgan Moses. Now you have a right tackle. You have a starting right tackle. Get the Morgan Moses ticker going. He's one of those spots. At least solve right tackle there for a year while you're fixing all the other stuff.
The Trey Smith thing is interesting because I agree with you. That's obviously that's the most obvious place where they should go with that money. The current thinking is that the Chiefs may apply the transition tag to Trey Smith, which is cheaper than the exclusive rights franchise tag. Effectively, the only difference between the two is number one, it's cheaper, but number two, other teams can negotiate if you are on the transition tag as opposed to the exclusive rights franchise tag, right? So the Chiefs, if they apply that to him, New England can still come in with an offer that Kansas City basically can't match because they have $100 million in cap space and Kansas City does not. So if the Patriots want Trey Smith, unless the Kansas City Chiefs put the exclusive rights franchise tag on him, which feels unlikely, they can basically get him, you know?
You are right, though. It's like right guard might be the one spot where they might not want to slide someone in. And Onwenu could play left guard. He could do a lot of different things. New England's also in this weird spot where maybe Cole Strange could still be decent.
Yeah.
We don't know what's happened with David Andrews at center and him coming back. Like they're probably not as bad as they were last year because a few guys got hurt and all their backups were they were practice squad guys that they were bringing in. It was awful. But part of that issue was the lack of depth that they built. So it might not be as bad on paper, but it's still one of those, like, if you don't bring in 3 or 4 new players on the O-line, it's going to feel like a loss of an offseason, I think, for the Patriots.
That's the thing. So I think the obvious place to throw the money is Trey Smith. If you don't throw it at Trey Smith, I think you also could potentially throw it at Ronnie Stanley, left tackle, lock up that spot. I think they should be in the market for all those serviceable offensive linemen, though, that we talked about as well. Allocate big money to one guy to come in and be your Joe Tooney, right? The guy that you've made one of the best paid players at his position to fix a spot, but then also throw several more rounds at lower level free agents that can come in and do a job as well, and get a couple of those guys in the building. Because this again. If they don't get Ronnie Stanley, maybe they're in the Alaric Jackson world. I mean, maybe that line is bad enough that even a Dan Moore Jr. is a potential upgrade at left tackle. Just try and raise the floor of this group as much as you can.
As long as you don't have to play the Browns, Dan Moore, serviceable
or
left
Ken
tackle.
Robinson. Robinson saved Minnesota's season by being a serviceable left tackle.
I think I'm of the mind here. I've been asked a lot about what New England should do at 4, and I think I'm landing on this one, Sam. I'm going to pay Ronnie Stanley at left tackle. Let's forget Trey Smith here. You're right. Within when he talked me out of it. I'm going to spend the money on Ronnie Stanley at left tackle because of the questions for Will Campbell and Kelvin Banks and some of those tackles in this draft. Then you're sitting here at 4, and I'm going to put Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, and Mason Graham all in the same bucket, right? Mason Graham at defensive tackle, absolute game wrecker when you watch him. I'm okay with any of those three players. So I think if New England signs Ronnie Stanley, take the tackle need out of it now, draft the best player available at 4, whether it's Carter, Hunter, or Graham. They might all get that blue chip status, the coveted blue chip status for non-quarterbacks. They might be the only 3 in this draft. Take the best one remaining of those 3. You don't have to worry about Will Campbell's arms or any of that stuff. I'm going to say that's the way to go. Ronnie Stanley plus the best player of Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, Mason Graham at 4.
Yeah, I mean, Stanley fixes left tackle. I mean, you can make a case if you're in the world of like thinking Will Campbell's a guard, you could all of a sudden you draft him at guard. Okay, it's very high for a guard, but
not at 4 though.
Yeah, it's very high, but like if it depends how good you think he is, right? Like Quentin Nelson went at 6 as one of the best guards, you're ever going to see as a prospect. Like it's doable. And the point is your offensive line is that bad. But all of a sudden at that point, you could have like Ronnie Stanley at left guard, Campbell at left tackle, Campbell at left guard, David Andrews is fine at center, Mike Owenu at right guard. And then you just need a right tackle from somewhere, which, we can platoon a few players of that. Or you add another, mid-tier free agent or so as your left guard, you find one of those guys. And then to me, wide receiver 1 in this draft class might be Travis Hunter. Like we're going to talk endlessly about, is he a two-way player? How do you play him? Do you play him at corner and get it's sort of about maximizing what he can do. If you don't care about that though, and you're just evaluating effectively 2 separate players, right? Travis Hunter, the wide receiver prospect, and Travis Hunter, the cornerback prospect. I think Travis Hunter, the wide receiver prospect, is wide receiver 1 in this draft, at which point take him at number 4 and you have your number 1 wide receiver.
In the other part that we keep mentioning about Travis Hunter is for certain teams, or at least the depth that he brings as a guy that can move from corner to receiver. On certain teams, he's more valuable as a receiver. For New England, who has a massive need at receiver,
right,
but does have Christian Gonzalez at corner, right? You might have more of a need at receiver, and Travis Hunter is more receiver than corner for the Patriots, and you almost reverse it. It's harder to do full-time receiver and like, oh, here's a package at corner, but you can do it. Like it is doable, and you're a backup or whatever. But for New England, he might be a receiver first, and the weapon that we're talking about that Drake May needs to, kickstart his career.
And look, I think we're going to be so focused on like the way of maximizing what he can do as this theoretical 2-way player, or, a guy that could play both sides of the ball. But if you just don't think that that's viable at the next level, if you're just like, I don't care, like it's cool, it's an amazing story, but for us, this guy is just wide receiver 1 in this draft, right? We are just looking at the best wide receiver prospect available to us. And by the way, a guy who almost certainly, the second you ask him to stop playing both ways, becomes measurably better at whichever side of the ball you're putting him at, right? Whether you view him as a wide receiver or a corner, the chances are we are not seeing the optimal version of Travis Hunter yet, because he's playing the other side of the ball as well. And as much as I think he got better at this and it became less of a problem, even last year, I think you can still see a lot of reps where he just looks tired, understandably so, right? Take all those off the table and you get a better player at either spot, wide receiver or corner. So I think the Patriots have a very strong argument to say this guy is a more dynamic, more explosive, more well-rounded threat than, McMillan, say. And he's the top wide receiver in the draft. We're just taking him at 4.
I think the bottom line for the Patriots is if they don't make multiple moves in free agency on the offensive line, it might take those things off the table. It could force their hand. Like if they go in with a massive tackle need, then maybe at 4 you trade down and you say, hey, I could take Kelvin Banks at 12 or something. Trade down from 4 if you find a trade partner, because you still have enough needs to fill. But I would hate to go into the draft and not feel good about taking Travis Hunter or Mason Graham or Abdul Carter, whoever's available there, just because I haven't filled my offensive line issues.
And that would be crazy to do given the money that they have to spend, right? Given the resources that they have to try and fix that in a way other teams, like there are some teams that are in a position where even if they needed or wanted to overhaul the offensive line with 4 or 5 players before the draft, they just don't have the money to make it happen. The Patriots have the money to make it happen. So like not doing that when there are players available that would make sense would be crazy. It would be negligent. The other area, by the way, that the Patriots could get into, maybe they can throw an offer to the Bengals for T. Higgins that the Bengals can't or won't turn down. Again, that's the thing that money lets you do, right? That's the flexibility that you have with $100 million war chest. You can say, well, what if we, package a draft pick and whatever else to the Bengals and we pay this guy? Like T. Higgins suddenly becomes the wide receiver answer. And then you can, again, continue to work on the offensive line elsewhere.
Plus, the Patriots have 9 picks.
Yeah.
It's 4 in the top 77, 5 in the top 104. So they do have that extra flexibility. That's the other interesting thing about 4, right? If they did go make a move for Higgins, give up some picks, they wouldn't give up 4. You could still take 4, trade down, accumulate, pick up the picks that you just traded essentially, or you grab potentially elite player at 4, elite player in Higgins, and just adding 2 elite players with Drake May at quarterback. I mean, all of a sudden this roster is looking much better just off the back of 2 moves.
I mean, if they have been able to throw a decent chunk of money at Ronnie Stanley, bring in a couple of more mid-level offensive linemen that could start, either definitely be penciled in to start or could start in a competition, you throw a chunk of your cap money and a couple of draft picks to Cincinnati for T. Higgins, and then you can still come out of the draft with maybe the best defensive player in the draft, whether it's Abdul Carter or Mason Graham, or even you get Travis Hunter, and actually now that you don't need him to be wide receiver 1, maybe now he can be both wide receiver and cornerback 3. Like maybe he can become a 2-way player for you now that you don't need him to be number 1 wide receiver. Like actually now you can entertain the idea that he can be a 2-way player.
The other thing I think they should explore, I'll bring up Cooper Kupp again. I just think the fit with May would be really good. You have to go evaluate, what does Cooper Kupp have left? I wouldn't want to give up a ton for him, but in this idea that where you need multiple receivers, you need multiple offensive and defensive linemen, you need multiple everything. Is Cooper Kupp one of those potential options? I think that's at least on the table. And then I like the second wave of receivers. So again, depending on how things go early, Jaden Higgins from Iowa State, Jack Besh from TCU, love both of those guys as potential options here. I think they have to at least dip into the deep running back group here and grab one of those guys with one of those 9 draft picks. And then you mentioned Malcolm Kuntz, maybe for the Jets. Tough to solve all these problems. I think the second tier group of defensive linemen, Malcolm Kuntz, BJ Hill, those types of players, I think should be on the table, right? So you get second wave of free agents there while you're filling all these other names, big needs across the rest of the roster.
None of it worked year 1 for them last year, but I actually liked the strategy of what they did in the draft, which is, look, we didn't trade down, we took our quarterback, and now we're basically like the rest of the draft is just going to be multiple picks at offensive line and receiver, right? And in receiver in particular, they ended up with Jalen Polk, Javon Baker. Neither one of those guys did anything year 1. In fact, Polk was a disaster year 1. Is like the bottom left quadrant of a bunch of those, statistical charts that sort of track various different things. Like he's always off on his own and like the least efficient receiver in the league, essentially. So, but I like the strategy. Like, let's just take a couple of swings and hope that one of them works out. And so far, neither of them did, but I wouldn't stop that, or I wouldn't let that stop me from basically repeating it, doing it all over again, draft 2 more receivers and hope that one of the 4 that we drafted in the last 2 years does something in training camp.
I do wonder how much the Mike Vrabel factor, how much he's talking about running the ball and what winning teams do. I do wonder how much of that, plays into the strategy here. And if they do focus on the perimeter players, much like when Jim Harbaugh took over with the Chargers, they had 0 players on their wide receiver depth chart and they went tackle first. They did receiver in volume later, but it was O-line first. And I do believe that's this offseason for New England. O-line first and then figure out the pass catchers later, which could be doubling up, tripling up in the draft once again to try to find somebody. Cool, man. They fixed?
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, they're not completely looking toward 2026 because we know things can change in a hurry. And I think Drake May does have that ability, right? If you put some pieces around him, he'll elevate the squad. But still think long-term here if you're the Patriots, even though they think they have the opportunity to reshape this roster and make big strides in 25, still with an eye toward, like, if you're trying to knock off the Bills, you're looking toward 26, much like the Jets would be.
Yeah. I mean, I don't expect them to be contending anytime soon, but their entire offseason should be about, let's make the situation around Drake May as good as it can be, because it was about as bad as it could be last year.
All right, man. Patriots are fixed. 8 teams done, quarter of the way through the league. This is fun. Love talking team building. We'll repeat ourselves a little bit, highlight some of the same players, but each team, they're at their own different spot, right? Life cycles are different levels of cap space and draft capital. So it's what's fun talking about all these things. Before we go, got to tell you about our friends over at Orgain. As a former professional athlete, Sam, care about what I put in my body. So especially when it comes to protein, that's why I'm so pumped to be sponsored by Orgain. Wish I had this when I was playing. Orgain believes real nutrition has the power to make a real difference in people's lives. Orgain's new 30-gram complete protein shakes offer protein-packed real nutrition designed to satisfy your cravings without any added sugar. Plus, they're an excellent source of premium ultra-filtered protein with all 9 essential amino acids. Orgain's products are handcrafted with high-quality ingredients. I like the vanilla or the chocolate, either one. Perfect post-workout right up here. This is my workout room and office right here. This is where I drink my Orgain. And from protein powders to bars to shakes to tons of other nutritional products, Orgain has products that the whole family will love. Remember, there are no quick fixes when it comes to your health. If you want more protein, give Orgain's 30-gram protein shakes a try. Head to Orgain.com/check-the-mic. Use code check-the-mic for 30% off your order. It's the best offer you'll find, but you have to use the code check-the-mic for 30% off. One more time, 30% off. Head to Orgain.com/check-the-mic. Use code check-the-mic. We'll be back again tomorrow, fixing 2 more divisions. I got a hard out at 12:30 tomorrow, so maybe we might start like 5 minutes early. Just set your alarms for 5 minutes earlier. So let's say 10:25. Haven't told you guys yet, but can we go at 10:25 tomorrow instead of 10:30? Think we can do it?
I mean, it works for me.
Great. And then we'll have mock draft Monday is still going to happen on Monday. Then we're going to hop in the car, head out to Indy for the Combine, give you guys another glimpse behind the scenes of the Combine, and we might have a couple pre-recorded Fixing Every Team episodes for next Wednesday and Thursday at the regularly scheduled times while we are at the Combine. So a lot planned here. Hit the subscribe, hit the thumbs up, do all the things, and we're home because the studio's being built. Check the Mic studio coming in weeks and or months at a time here. So a lot going on here with Check the Mic.
Yep.
Dynamite drop in, as always, Sam. All right, thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you again tomorrow with more Check the Mic.